Good morning. The committee meets today to receive testimony on evolving workforce dynamics and challenges for defense acquisition and defense industrial base personnel. This committee has spent several years examining the various challenges for our defense acquisition system. We have worked to identify supply chain problems, to pinpoint shortages in critical materials, and to improve investments in long lead items for our weapon systems. However, there is nothing more important for our defense acquisition strategy than our workforce. The men and women of the Defense Acquisition Corps and the personnel in the defense industrial base whom they help to guide and oversee. We cannot solve our acquisition problems without an adequate supply of skilled and trained workers. This challenge is spread through many sectors of our defense industrial base and in many geographic areas. From my own Rhode Island perspective, I often see the workforce challenging facing the submarine industrial base and the textile industry. These sectors each have their own unique hiring challenges, but those are further exacerbated by widespread competition for talent among federal agencies, between the federal government and the private sector, and even between the defense industrial base and the rest of the commercial sector. During today's hearings, we will take a step back to better understand the broader dynamics at play and consider how the Department of Defense can or should adapt its hiring and retention processes to try to address these challenges. Until we thoroughly identify and understand the changes happening in the broader workforce, we will not be able to properly meet them. Many of the defense workforce strains are related to demographic changes as more millennial and Generation Z workers enter the workforce, and many of our baby boomers, who have been the backbone of the defense workforce for decades, begin to exit in greater numbers. The younger generations have different demands and expectations of their employers than previous generations, especially in the post-COVID landscape. I'm concerned that the department has not fully recognized this evolution and has not fully adapted its talent management practices as a result. The sources of these labor challenges are diverse. Two-thirds of Americans who lost their full-time job during the pandemic say they are only somewhat active or not very active at all in searching for a new job. About half are not willing to take jobs that do not offer the opportunity for remote work. And we know that younger Americans are prioritizing their personal growth over searching for a job, with many saying that they're more focused on acquiring new skills, education, or training before re-entering the job market. To discuss these issues and help us better understand how the Department of Defense can adapt its hiring and retention policies, I would like to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses. Mr. Johnny Taylor is the President and CEO of the Society for Human Resources Management. Ms. Taylor's career spans more than 20 years as a lawyer, human resources executive, and CEO in both the profit and not-for-profit sector. He is a global leader on the future of employment, workplace culture, and leadership. Dr. Simon Johnson is the Ronald A. Kurtz Professor of Entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management. He is the co-author of the book Jumpstarting America: How Breakthrough Science Can Revive Economic Growth and the American Dream. Dr. Johnson was previously a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, a member of the Congressional Budget Office's Panel of Economic Advisors, and a member of the Financial Research Advisory Committee of the U.S. Treasury's Office of Financial Research. Dr. Julie Lockwood is the Director of Business Modernization at the Institute for Defense Analyses, or IDA. An economist with expertise in labor, health, and computational economics, Dr. Lockwood built and led the human capital group within IDA, a team of researchers that use data analytics, machine learning, and applied econometrics to address Department of Defense personnel and readiness issues. And we're grateful to have such an accomplished panel of experts with us to discuss this important issue. Thank you again to our witnesses, and we certainly look forward to your testimony. Let me now recognize Ranking Member Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Defense employs more than 700,000 civilians who ensure that our military personnel are capable of performing their mission. Their mission is to deter and win wars to protect our national security. For this reason, the Armed Services Committee takes a special interest in ensuring that the Department of Defense has every tool necessary to build a civilian workforce that is capable, innovative, and dedicated to keeping our country safe. The basic principles of building an effective workforce are simple. The Department of Defense needs to be able to hire the best people quickly and pay them what they're worth. But if an employee does not meet expectations, the department needs to be able to dismiss that employee and find someone better. Unfortunately, the laws and regulations governing the Department of Defense workforce are anything but simple and efficient. Hiring takes too long, even when Congress provides accelerated direct hiring authority. Pay is often inadequate, especially in trade provisions such as welders and electricians who maintain the Navy's nuclear-powered submarines and carriers. The department also does not pay competitive salaries for jobs that require extensive formal education. And everyone knows how hard it is to terminate an underperforming employee. Those who spend any length of time in the Pentagon have a story of an underperforming colleague who was shuffled around to various offices to get him out of the way. Similarly, most know a truly exceptional performer who left the Department of Defense in search of better rewards for her hard work. The status quo is unacceptable, and the evidence is everywhere we look. Our public shipyards struggle to attract skilled trade workers. The Navy is hemorrhaging the civilian mariners whose work ensures the delivery of critical supplies around the world to the rest of the fleet. We cannot hire or retain enough doctors or nurses to staff our military hospitals. Cyber professionals leave the Department of Defense in droves to join other government agencies or the private sector. I could go on. The unique mission of the Department of Defense demands that Congress provide it exceptional authorities to allow the department to build the civilian workforce needed to support our warfighters. The system that governs every other federal agency is inadequate for our national defense workforce. Numerous bipartisan commissions and our military's senior leaders agree. I hope we can use this year's National Defense Authorization Act to provide legislative tools to achieve the basic principles of an effective civilian workforce. I would ask the witnesses to help us understand the weaknesses of the department's current human resource system. But more importantly, I hope the witnesses can tell us what we can do to make the Department of Defense a more competitive employer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Mr. Taylor, please begin.
The state of the workforce. Thank you. SHRM empowers people and workplaces by advancing human resources practices and maximizing human potential. We're 75 years old this year, and we've been the trusted authority on all things work, workers, and the workplace. Our nearly 340,000 HR professionals across the globe represent nearly 362 million workers and their families in 180 countries. A few weeks ago, SHRM released its State of the Workplace report, which focused on the challenges employers faced in 2023 and the critical issues we expect that they will face in 2024 and beyond. The report looks at 4 key areas which impact the workplace. First, balancing inflation and talent challenges. Yes, we want to pay our people more, but somehow the consumer is pushing back increasingly on paying more for services and goods. Training and evolving workforce. Indeed, both Chairman Reed and Ranking Member Wicker spoke to the challenges of, for the first time, we've had 5 generations in the workplace at once, and they have significantly different needs. Thirdly, we looked at realizing the full potential of artificial intelligence. Quite the debate these days, and I'll spend more time in my introductory comments addressing that. And then we're struggling with engaging workers. So it's just not enough to have the bodies there, but to engage them is yet a significant challenge. I'd like to talk for just a minute about key findings from our report. One is inflation was the top concern for organizations in 2023, and not just general inflation, but indeed wage inflation. 73% of HR professionals indicated that this is their current #1 concern. We want the talent, we want to pay them, but we've got to figure out how to do so. Secondly, labor shortages. They're another, and they were the #2 issue in 2023. We've all read it, somewhere between 8, 9, 10, 11 million open jobs at any given time, and that's created a major concern for organizations. More than 2/3 of employers have said, we simply can't find enough people. There are labor shortages. And then we need to reduce the cost and increase efficiencies. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's directly led to adoption of AI and other technologies. Nearly 9 in 10 workers believe fair compensation from current employees, including the government, Department of Defense, for example, should be the top priority for organizations in 2024, yet only 27% of HR executives say this is their top priority, so a major disconnect. And a quarter of HR departments are currently using artificial intelligence applications for specific purposes such as recruiting talent, employee training, and development. So in 2024, we expect that number will significantly be increased. And finally, improving people managers, that is the people leaders, understanding of their roles and developing more of their what we call soft skills. They're not so soft, power skills, such as empathy. Top organizational priorities for 2024 are all about not just getting the talent, but retaining the talent. And what our data tells us overwhelmingly is that 60% or more of employees leave not the employer, but their manager, their people manager, and thus the challenge for us. So let's talk about the labor shortages that we're all seeing and are specifically impacting the Department of Defense. HR departments are being compelled to strategize to solve for the labor shortages with a market that does not want to respond in traditional ways. A key focus in the past was increased salary, and that will help you attract talent. Well, what we know about the younger generation is that doesn't necessarily work. Our data will tell us that employees will say they will actually leave an employer for less money to go make less money if they get to work for a more empathetic leader. This is the reality of Generation Z and millennials and something we have to take into consideration at the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense can greatly benefit by retraining and retaining officers and enlisted personnel who leave the military and are having difficulty finding work in the private sector. This is a significant conversation in the private sector world, I can tell you, is how do we create opportunities? How do we translate the experiences of people who've come from the military and from the Department of Defense into private sector jobs? But that creates an opportunity for the DoD because, in fact, you might consider keeping those people. But returning alone is not enough. We need to train them and train these employees to be more adaptable. Because in today's rapidly changing world, adaptability is paramount. And SHRM research indicates that over 31% of organizations are modifying their recruitment strategies, including enhancing social media presence, advertising, and employee referrals. So in summary, got a lot more to tell you, but SHRM's testimony today underscores several pivotal areas where organizations can concentrate their efforts to attract, retain, and empower the workforce. Very quickly, adopt skills-based hiring, invest in retention, leverage apprenticeship programs, modernize talent management processes. This is, Mr. Wicker, Senator Wicker, a real challenge for the government. And we need to invest in people managers, upskill and reskill the workforce, create a culture of learning. The employees want this. They don't want to take the job and know the job for 30 years and then retire. Create AI responsibly. It's not enough to just enable the technology, but to do so responsibly. And then to focus on human and machine collaboration. At SHRM, we speak a lot about AI plus HI will equal the new ROI. So it's not a sum-zero game for employees. We've got to embrace this technology, and we think there are huge opportunities for the Department of Defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Dr. Johnson, please.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to make 3 points. The first is about a term that I fear you're going to hear increasingly, which is stranded expertise. It's a term being used in the tech sector to refer to the impact of AI in particular. But of course, it's not a new problem. We've been facing issues with expert people, people who spend a lot of time acquiring education and training, losing opportunities and being left behind. These have been a problem since at least the wave of automation. We've experienced this in the 1980s. The shock of Chinese imports from the early 2000s exacerbated this. And in the age of AI, I think we're going to be seeing much more of this. And of course, it's overlaid, Senator Reid, with some of the issues you've talked about in terms of the demographics. I would also highlight the shift of innovation away from the historical dispersion of the United States towards the East and West Coast. And of course, from a broader social, economic point of view, this is a problem. But my second point is that this is actually an opportunity for the Department of Defense and a way to think about responding to the problems both you, Senator Reid, and Senator Wicker have already flagged. Because the key point is that innovation and technology develops and is maintained in particular geographies around hubs. And we used to have a lot of hubs that were very dynamic in the United States. Now we have fewer. But that can be addressed. The analysis we did suggests there's over 100 urban areas in 36 states where 80 million Americans live that are ripe for stepping up to become fantastic places for exactly the kind of problems that you're trying to solve and address on this committee. So there is potentially available labor. So there are already skills. There is no doubt some retraining needed and some repositioning. Of course, one of the problems with apprenticeship programs in the United States, one of the reasons the private sector doesn't, frankly speaking, love them, is they're afraid that once you train a worker, that worker leaves and goes to work for a competitor. But if the goal is to strengthen the defense industrial base, and if people are sticky because we've all become less mobile, modern Americans are much less mobile than our predecessors, then if you're training people in a particular area to work on submarines, for example, or to acquire welding skills and electrical skills that are relevant to the submarine business, and they leave to a related enterprise in that area, you've not weakened the defense industrial base, you've actually strengthened and deepened its ties in that community. You've also, of course, got a reserve workforce that can be pulled in if you need to increase those activities. I think from what I understand, Rhode Island, Senator Reid, you've got some terrific hub-based developments, but we're seeing this all around the country, and the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed on a bipartisan basis, I think included affirmation of the importance of this as a general policy approach, but also something I would say that the DoD can take on board. Included, however, in that approach, Senator Reid, would be addressing one of the key points you made, which is labor force participation. So it's not enough to have the opportunities. People have to want to come to work, and that's partly about compensation. It's partly about can they access childcare. It's partly about how long does it take to commute to work. There's a package that should be looked at of this hub level, and I would commend that to this committee and to the DoD for further investigation, the way it overlays with your existing activities and priorities around the country. The third issue is, I think, worth stating out loud, which is China. And I think that's on the back of all our minds, or maybe the front, Senator Wicker, when we think about the potential threats here. And China is, of course, not just threatening, but actually investing very heavily in further research and development, trying to move innovation, trying to own the future of jobs across a lot of civilian, but also, I think, military-related activities. And the best way to respond to that would be threefold. First of all, invest more in science for the United States. Secondly, figure out how to commercialize and bring more of those activities to market, because if you've got a strong civilian economy supporting innovation, that's going to help you on the military side also. And obviously, there's a huge amount of spillovers and interaction there. And again, I would recommend the hub-based approach for that. And the third approach, third piece would be to develop a line of work for artificial intelligence that is pro-worker. What do I mean by pro-worker? I mean, within the framework that Mr. Taylor's suggesting, AI is certainly arriving, but is this AI that is going to displace manual workers and displace workers with less education, or does it enhance their productivity and enhance their opportunities? I think it can actually go both ways. There's a lot of opportunity, a lot of issues around healthcare, a lot of issues around education, a lot of issues around manufacturing that are not the top priority
the committee meets today
AI-oriented
to
investments in
on
innovation in the private sector. They're more
dynamics and
about
challenges for
social media
defense
and digital
acquisition
advertising,
and
to be
defense
frank.
industrial
So
base.
focusing on those activities, and I think both Senator Reid and Senator Wicker alluded to this, changing how we think about manual work and changing the value we place on manual skills. I think that's something we've lost in this country over the past 40 or so years. It's something we were very strong at during World War II. That was the basis of being able to scale up that economy.
We have worked to
and move it
identify
towards
supply
wartime
chain
production.
problems.
To the extent we've
pinpoint
outsourced
shortages in
those
critical
jobs to other
materials
places and
to
created
improve
fragile
investments
supply
in
chains, we should
long
look at
lead
AI
items
as
for
an
our weapon
opportunity to
However,
motivate
there's
people
nothing more
and
important
to
for our defense
bring
acquisition
technology to bear that
strategy
enhances
than our workforce.
the
The
effectiveness
men and women
of
of
that
the
part of the
Defense
workforce. Thank
Acquisition
you.
Corps and the personnel in the
Thank you
defense
very much,
industrial
Dr.
base
Johnson.
whom they
Dr.
help to
Lockwood,
guide
please.
and oversee. We cannot solve our acquisition
Reid,
problems without
Ranking
an
Member Wicker,
adequate supply of
and fellow
skilled
distinguished
and trained
members
workers.
of the Senate Armed
This
Services
challenge
Committee.
is
Good
spread
morning.
through many sectors of our defense industrial
I'm
base
honored to
and in
contribute
many
to this
geographic
timely
areas.
discussion on trends
From my own Rhode Island
impacting the
perspective,
nation's
I often
defense
see the
civilian
workforce
workforce.
challenging
My
facing the
perspectives are informed by my own research, that of fellow economists,
and also the work of many talented researchers at the Institute for Defense Analyses and at other federally funded research and development centers
the marine
supporting the
industrial
Department of
base,
Defense.
and the textile
I
industry.
should state that the views
These
that I
sectors
express
each
today are
have their
mine
own
and not
unique
necessarily
hiring
those of
challenges,
IDA, as
but
a
those are
nonpartisan
further
institution.
exacerbated by
To
widespread competition
succeed,
for
the
talent
Department of
among
Defense and
federal
its partners
agencies,
and the defense
between the
industrial
federal
base
government
must
and the private
maintain
sector,
skilled,
and even
capable,
between
and
the defense
adequately staffed
industrial base
workforces.
and the rest of the
Today's
commercial
labor
sector.
market is characterized
During
by the
today's
convergence
hearings,
of
we will
several
take a
important
step
trends, some of
back,
which have
better
been discussed today
understand the
already,
broader dynamics
which
at
together
play,
produce
and consider how the
intense
Department of
competition
Defense
for
can
talent,
or should adapt its
increasing
hiring
job market
and
polarization
retention
driven by
processes to try to
technological
address these
advances
challenges.
has left many mid-skilled
Until we
workers
thoroughly
behind.
identify and
Young
understand the
men's
changes
rates of
happening
college
in the broader
attendance,
workforce,
enrollment,
we
and
will not be able
completion
to
are in
properly meet
decline.
them. Many
An
of the
aging
defense
workforce will
trends
bring
are
waves of
related to
retirements to
demographic
DoD,
changes as more
threatening
millennial
continuity
and Generation Z
and
workers
also institutional memory. The gig economy, meanwhile, offers workers low-commitment alternatives and a very flexible lifestyle. And remote work is here to stay in some form or other. In addition, affordable
enter
housing
the
shortages
workforce,
add to
and many
existing
of our
downward
baby
pressure on
boomers,
worker
who have been the
mobility,
backbone of
and
the
rapid
defense
advances in
workforce for
AI and other
decades,
technologies
begin to
are
exit in
accelerating
greater
competition
numbers.
for STEM
The
graduates.
younger generations have
One or
different
two of
demands and
these concurrent
expectations
trends alone
of
would
their
be troubling,
employers
but taken
than
together, I
previous
believe they
generations,
represent a sea
especially in the
change.
post-COVID landscape.
At
I'm
present,
concerned
there
that
is
the department
excess
has
demand
not
for
fully
labor in the United
recognized
States,
this
with
evolution
9.5
and
million
has not
open
fully
positions for
adapted
only
its talent
6.5 million
management
workers.
practices as a result.
And that's assuming every
The
worker
sources
is
of
well
these labor
suited to the open
challenges are
positions,
diverse.
which they are not.
Two-thirds of Americans who lost their full-time job
DoD
during
and
the
its industry
pandemic
partners
say
are
they
not currently
only
well
somewhat
positioned to compete
active
effectively
or
for
not
the high
very
demand
active
talent that
at
our
all
national
in
security
searching
requires.
for a new job. About half are
These
not willing to
trends
take
impact
jobs
each
that do
segment
not
of the labor
offer the
force that this
opportunity
committee
for
seeks to
remote
address.
work. And we know that
Wage-grade
younger
workers in our
Americans are
shipyards and our
prioritizing their
arsenals, STEM professionals in our labs and in the acquisition workforce, and critical supervisors and middle managers on the GS schedule. A common set of prescriptions
personal
can
growth
improve the
over
health of
searching
each.
for a job, with many
To compete
saying
for
that
the
they're
skilled
more
workers that
focused on
DoD and
acquiring
its
new
partners in
skills,
the industrial
education,
base need
or
to accomplish
training
their critical
before
missions, the
re-entering
department
job
should
market.
act
To
aggressively
discuss these issues
to
and
hire
help us
faster,
better understand how the
pay
Department of Defense
competitively,
can adapt
reward
its hiring and
performance,
retention policies,
manage
I would like to
underperformance,
welcome our
and set
distinguished
the
panel of
conditions
witnesses.
needed for managers to
Mr.
make
Johnny
effective
Taylor is the
workforce mix
president and
decisions.
CEO of the Society for Human
Moreover,
Resources Management.
DoD has an
Mr.
excellent
Taylor's
opportunity
career
to engage
spans more
with
than
this
20 years
missing
as a
middle of
lawyer,
mid-skill
Human
workers,
resources executive,
a labor
and
segment
CEO
traditionally
in both
heavily
the
involved
profit
in
and
national
not-for-profit
defense.
sector.
By
He
filling
is a
critical
global leader on
shortfalls
the
with a
future of
combination of
employment,
trained workers
workplace
and
culture,
enabling
and
technologies,
leadership.
some of the AI
Dr.
that my
Simon
colleagues here
Johnson
have spoken
is the
to
Ronald
already.
A. Kurtz Professor
People
of
need purpose and
Entrepreneurship at the
inspiration to
MIT
get off the
Sloan School
couch
of
and back in
Management.
the workforce. If you take away only one idea from my time with you today, please let that be that incentives matter. By incentives, I do not only mean the pay and benefits
He
that
is the
employees might earn for an
author
excellent
of the
performance.
book Jumpstarting
I also mean the
America,
conditions
How
under
Breakthrough
which
Science
DoD's
Can
many
Revive
managers,
Economic Growth
workers, and
the American
researchers
Dream.
invest their
Dr.
personal
Johnson was
effort
previously a
and
senior
make
fellow
day-to-day
at the Peterson
decisions that
Institute for
impact the
International
department's
Economics,
bottom line.
a member of the Congressional
I believe that
Budget
DoD's
Office's
dedicated
panel of
workers generally
economic
want to
advisors,
make optimal
and a member
choices,
of the Financial
but are often
Research
stymied in
Advisory
doing
Committee
so.
of the U.S.
You
Treasury's
can
Office of
set
Financial
the
Research.
conditions to
Dr.
align
Julie
incentives
Lockwood
within these
is the
decision
Director of Business
environments
Modernization
to make it
at the
easier
Institute
for everyone to
Defense
choose the
Analysis, or
sensible
IDA,
thing for the
an
mission
economist with
and for the
expertise in labor,
taxpayer in their
health, and
daily work,
computational economics.
whether that is
Dr.
shaping
Lockwood
DoD's
built
workforce
and led the
mix
human
or when
capital
managing their
group
teams.
within IDA.
Incentive alignment will
team
produce
of
more
researchers
effective
that use
decisions
data
and free
analytics,
resources
machine learning,
for
and
other
applied
mission-critical
econometrics
areas. I
to address
personally think we could use a
Department
few more
of Defense
submarines. Decisive action can help achieve this incentive alignment and will reinvigorate DoD's civilian workforce by clearly signaling that the department values
personnel and
its
readiness
wage-grade,
issues.
professional,
we're
and
grateful to
defense
have such an
industry
accomplished
personnel,
panel of
that it will
experts with us to
recognize and
discuss
reward
this
their
important
contributions.
issue.
These
Thank you
innovations
again
will
for
allow
all that you
DoD
said.
to advance
Certainly
as a
look forward to your
high-performing
testimony.
organization.
Now,
Thank
let
you
me
for
now
your time,
recognize
and I
Franklin
look forward
Miller.
to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of
Thank
Defense
you all
employs
for
more than
excellent
700,000 civilians
This is, I
who
think,
ensure
the
that our
beginning of
military
a
personnel
dialogue,
are
not,
capable
a
of
one-stop,
performing their mission.
and
Their mission is to deter and win
I
wars
like
to
submarines,
protect our
but
national
I share that
security.
with Senator.
For this reason, the Armed Services Committee
only
takes
Here,
a
here,
special interest
the
in
only thing I
ensuring
take
that
issue
the
with is
Department
she
of
said a
Defense
few.
has every
We
tool
need
necessary to build a
quite a lot
civilian
more
workforce that is capable,
I
innovative,
agree.
and
The only
dedicated to
condition he
keeping
puts on
our
them, they
country
all have to
safe.
be named after
The basic
a city in
principles of
Mississippi,
building
but
an
that's a small
effective
point.
workforce are simple.
One
The
of the
Department of
issues
Defense needs
that
to be
I
able.
see as I try to deal with these issues is that we have a problem bringing in new workers. We also have a problem at the supervisory level.
To
And our,
hire the best people
discussions
quickly
with,
and pay them what they're worth.
people in the industry
But if
say
an
that's
employee does
probably
not
one of
meet
the key
expectations, the
things that is
department needs to be
slowing them
able to
down.
dismiss that employee and
They can
find
get by
someone
with
better.
younger workers, but
Unfortunately, the
without
laws and
supervisors, they
regulations
can't
governing the
leverage
Department of
those
Defense
workers.
workforce
So, Mr.
are
Taylor,
anything but
and then
simple
Dr.
and
Johnson, Dr.
efficient.
Lockwood, your comments.
Hiring takes too
Well,
long,
indeed, so I
even
alluded to
when
that. Thank
Congress
you,
provides
Chairman Reed.
accelerated direct
We
hiring
know
authority.
that
Pay is often
even in industries
inadequate,
like the tech valley,
especially in trade
Silicon
provisions
Valley,
such as
tech
welders and
industries,
electricians
we can
to
get
maintain the
employees to
Navy's
come in. The
nuclear-powered
difficulty is keeping those
submarines
employees,
and carriers.
and increasingly,
The
the new
department also
difficulty
does
is
not
keeping
pay
people in middle
competitive
management,
salaries
in
for
part
jobs that
because
require
we've naively
extensive
assumed
formal
that because
education.
one is
And
a
everyone
great
knows how hard it
mechanic,
is to
that one will be a
terminate
great
an
manager of
underperforming-
mechanics. And so we take that person, we don't invest in teaching them how to be a great people manager. They hate the job, and the employees that work for them hate the job, and therefore no one wins, and
being
that has
employed.
led to the
Those who
retention
spend
problem.
any
So
length
one
of
of the
time in the
areas that
Pentagon
we
have a
strongly recommend
story
the Department of
of
Defense
an
consider
underperforming
doing is
colleague who
investing
was
in people
shuffled
management.
around to
How do
various
you,
offices
it's not
to
enough
get
for
him out
someone
of
to
the
have
way.
the
Similarly,
underlying
most
technical
know
skills. We've
a
got to
truly
teach them,
exceptional performer
technically to do the
who left
job,
the
but teach
Department
them
of
how to
Defense in
manage
search
people.
of better
Because,
rewards
listen, at
for
the end
her
of the day,
hard
we've all
work.
talked about
The
compensation,
status
and
quo
compensation
is
does matter,
unacceptable.
but all of the
And the
data tells
evidence
us
is
that
everywhere
people
we look.
will leave
Our
an
public
employer
shipyards
if
struggle
the only
to
thing you're
attract
doing is
skilled
making a lot
trade
of money,
workers.
but being
The Navy
mistreated,
is
and they don't
hemorrhaging
find
the
that this is a
civilian
good work environment.
mariners
So people
whose work
management
ensures the
work
delivery
is a
of critical
lot of the work
supplies
the Department of
around
Defense
the
should
world
consider
to
investing
the
in.
rest of the fleet.
Dr. Johnson.
We cannot hire or
So,
retain
Senator Reid, I think there's a good
enough
news,
doctors or
bad
nurses
news
to
aspect to
staff our
artificial
military
intelligence
hospitals.
in answer to your question.
Cyber
The good news is
professionals
there is definitely potential, and we can see it already in some parts of the private sector, to develop tools that will enhance the ability of supervisors to manage more effectively and perhaps make it more easier to transition to become a supervisor. So I don't think there's enough
leave the
effort going
Department
into
of
that. I think that would be
Defense
something
in
very good
droves
for the DoD to
to
focus
join
on also.
other
But I think that the
government
bad news
agencies
part is
or
there is
the
also a
private sector.
tendency, and
I
not,
could go on.
I'm sure in this room, but elsewhere,
unique mission
to
of the
think about
Department of
algorithms
Defense
as
demands that
replacing
Congress
people and doing the
provide
work, and we can
it
rely on them and we can
exceptional
close our eyes and the
authorities
car will drive itself.
to
That's a
allow the
bad
department
mistake.
to build
But what
the
we're looking at
civilian
is, as
workforce
Taylor already
needed
said,
to
is
support
different ways
our
for people to
warfighters.
interact with
The
machines.
system that governs
At the supervisory
every
level,
other
what I would
federal
emphasize,
agency
making those
is
manual jobs
inadequate
more
for
attractive,
our
more
national
interesting,
defense
pulling younger people
workforce.
in with an AI
Numerous
element,
bipartisan
not thinking
commissions
about
and our
replacing people,
military's
because that
senior
will
leaders
be a
agree.
mistake.
I hope we
Dr.
can use
Lockwood,
this
please.
year's National Defense
Yes, I'll just
Authorization
build
Act
on both of
to
these
provide
gentlemen's remarks
legislative
by
tools
noting I
to achieve the
wholeheartedly
basic
support Mr.
principles
Taylor's
of an effective
cry for
civilian
additional training.
workforce.
I'll
would
note
ask the
that
witnesses
among
to
our
help us
defense workforce, that our uniformed personnel are frequently sent to special schools to learn managerial and leadership skills. However, very little investment is made in our civilian managers.
understand the
And
weaknesses
this
of
is
the
this is a critical gap
current
that you
human
can fill.
resource system.
I will
But
note
more
that some
importantly, I hope
important
the witnesses
changes
can
have
tell
been
us
made, some
what we
progress has
can
been
do
made
to
in the
make
area of
the
leadership
Department
training
of
for the
more
acquisition workforce in
competitive.
particular, but
Thank you,
leadership
Mr.
is
Chairman.
different than management. So this is a key opportunity for the department.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Thank you very much. Mr. Taylor, in terms of addressing our problems, one suggestion that I think everyone made, directly or indirectly, is
The
we've
state
got this
of the
pool
workforce.
of,
Thank you.
workers,
Sherman powers
military
people
personnel
and
that we can
workplaces by
transition. And just
advancing
very quickly,
human
because my
resources
time is
practices
expiring
and
rapidly.
maximizing human potential. We're
Mr.
75
Taylor,
years.
How do we encourage military personnel who are leaving the service to go into industries related?
Yes, we know that there currently exist transition programs, but we've got to double down on those. If we know that an individual is within 6 months to 12 months away from either retiring or completing
Our
the
nearly
military service, we've got to
340,000
give them the
HR
skills to make
professionals
sure that they
across
can
the
translate
globe
that either
represent
to a
nearly
role in the
362
DIV, maybe not
million
necessarily in
workers
the
and their
military,
families in
or
180
within the private
countries.
sector. So training
A few
them
weeks
on
ago,
how to
Sherm
become
released its State
recruitable
of the
in the private
Workplace
sector
report,
would
which
be the way to
focused
do
on the
it.
challenges
Thank you.
employers
My time is
faced in
expiring. There's one other
2023.
question
And the
I wanna-
critical
or comment
issues
I
we
wanna
expect
put
that
on
they
the-
will face in
the table. One is,
2024 and beyond.
Dr. Lockwood
The report
focused
looks at
on the
4 key
acquisition
areas which
forces in
impact
DoD
the
and
workplace.
management
First,
training. One of the
balancing
areas, I think, too, is
inflation
in the
and talent
civilian companies,
challenges.
the
Yes, we want to
contractors.
pay our people
I-
more,
my
but
sense is
somehow
they
the
don't do
consumer
that
is pushing
very
back
well.
increasingly
Is,
on paying
Dr.
more
Lockwood
for
or
services.
Dr. Jones?
I would respectfully take a question on the management within our contractual partners for the record.
Very good, thank you. Dr. Johnson?
And goods.
I
Training and evolving
think
workforce.
you're pressing on
Indeed,
exactly the right
both
issue
Chairman
here, Senator Reid. I
and
think that we're
Ranking
underinvesting in
Member Wicker
managerial
spoke to the
capabilities across a large
challenges
part of our
of,
economy.
for
And
the
of course,
first time,
there's
we've
a
had
big
5 generations
sucking sound
in
as
the
talent gets
workplace
pulled
at
towards
once,
the
and they have
Silicon Valley type of sector, and the rest of the
different
economy
needs.
is neglected
Thirdly,
and
we looked at
underinvested in
realizing
by
the
itself,
full
which is
potential of artificial
very
intelligence.
counterproductive
Quite the
from an
debate
economic point of view
these
and from a
days.
national security
And I'll
point of view.
spend
So I
more
think
time in the
you're
my introductory
is
comments
absolutely top
addressing
priority
that.
in line with
And
both,
then we're
with certainly what
struggling
Mr. Taylor
with
said. I'm sure
engaging
what Ms.
workers.
Lockwood will say
So it's
later.
just
Last
not
word
enough
very
to have the
quickly, Mr.
bodies
Taylor.
there, but to
Thank you.
engage them is yet a significant challenge.
Senator Wicker, please.
I'd like to talk for
Thank
just a
you,
minute
Mr. Chairman.
about key
In a
findings from our
2023
report. One
Federal
is
Employee
inflation
Viewpoint
was the
Survey,
top concern for organizations in 2023.
workers were
and not just
asked
general inflation,
whether
but
they
indeed
agree with
wage
this statement.
inflation.
In my work unit, differences in performance are recognized in a meaningful way. Only 45% of respondents agreed with that. The same survey asked this
73%
question,
of HR
asked if they
professionals
agree with this
indicated
statement.
that this is their
There
current
are
number
no
one
poor
concern.
performers in
We
my
want
work
the talent.
unit.
We want to pay them.
Only
but we've got to figure out
19%
how to
of
do so.
employees said
Secondly,
that.
labor shortages. They're another, and they were the
Dr.
number 2
Lockwood, in
issue
your
in
written statement, you say
2023. We've all
DOD
read
needs to
it.
accelerate
Somewhere between 8,
reprimand
9, 10, 11
or,
million open jobs at any given
separation
time,
in
and that's
cases
created a major
of
concern for
underperformance
organizations. More than
that does not
2/3 of
improve with
employers have
reasonable
said
training
we simply
investment.
can't find enough people.
Tell us
There
about
are
that
labor
and what
shortages.
can Congress do?
And then we need to reduce the cost.
Thank you for the question.
And increase efficiencies, and I'll talk a little
I
bit
think the
more
bottom
about how
line
that's
is that
directly
if high performers
led to
are compensated,
adoption
promoted, and
of
otherwise
AI and
treated
other
the same
technologies.
as mediocre
Nearly
performers,
9
that
in
those
10
high
workers
performers will be
believe fair
discouraged and take their
compensation
talent
from
somewhere else.
current employees, including the government,
So I think we
Department of
can
Defense.
pretty clearly say that that's suboptimal for the department. I think there are a number of things the department could do to enable managers. One thing
example,
is
should be
perhaps
the
to
top
limit
priority for
employment
organizations
terms.
in 2024, yet only
one might imagine a
27%
new
of
form of
HR
federal
executives
employment,
say this is
a limited
their
term
top priority. So a
contract.
major
We see this in
disconnect.
several other
And a
developed
quarter
economies.
of HR departments are
This
currently
would
using
kind of split the
artificial
difference,
intelligence
perhaps,
applications
between
for
the use of
specific
a
purposes,
very
such as
flexible
recruiting
contracted
talent,
solution
employee training,
through
and
through
development.
one of our
So in
industrial-based partners
2024, we
or
expect
our
that number will
federal contractor,
significantly be
and
increased.
what we
And
understand
finally,
now as federal
improving
employment,
people
to
managers,
give both
that is
the
the people
department
leaders,
and the worker
understanding
added
of their roles
flexibility.
and developing more of their what we call soft skills, and
Okay,
not so soft power
I
skills,
asked
such
what
as empathy.
Congress could do.
Top organizational
and, do you
priorities
think
for
it would take
2024 are
statutory
all about not just
changes to
getting the
implement
talent,
something like
but
that?
retaining the talent. And what
I
our data
do,
tells us
in particular because oftentimes both civilian and uniformed managers have concern of reprisal or other forms of
overwhelmingly is that
unfortunate
60%
action
or more
should
of
they do the
employees
hard
leave,
work of
not
trying
the
to
employer,
separate
but their
a
manager,
non-productive
their
member
people
of
manager,
the staff.
and thus
So,
the challenge for us.
Congress clearly
So
signaling
let's
that
talk
this
about
is
the
your
labor
intent
shortages
and
that we're
desired
all seeing
outcome, I
are
believe, would be helpful
specifically
to the
impacting
department.
the Department of Defense.
Let me
HR
ask all of you about the
departments are being
federal
compelled
wage
to
system.
strategize to solve for the
It's
labor
not been
shortages with a
reformed
market that
since
does not
72.
want to respond
Seemed to be a
in
long
traditional
time.
ways.
It
A key
has
focus in the past
weaknesses
was
such as
increased salary,
the
and that
system
will help you
in
attract
determining
talent.
the
Well, what we
wage is
know about the younger
hyperlocal.
generation is that doesn't
It's
necessarily
incredibly
work. Our data will
bureaucratic
tell
and
us that
complicated,
employees will say they will
and
actually
by
leave
law,
an
public
employer
unions, public
for
employee
less money
unions
to go make
are
less money if
heavily
they get to work for a more
involved.
empathetic
Dr. Lockwood,
leader.
let's start
This
with
is
you.
the reality of Generation Z and millennials, and something we have.
In my opening statement, I mentioned welders and electricians. The Navy's public shipyards are struggling to hire and retain these critical workers. Does the FWS have something to
take
do
into
with this? And what
consideration of
can
the
Congress do
Department of
to help?
I
Defense.
believe
The
it
Department
does.
of Defense can greatly benefit
so
by retraining
currently
and
wages are
retaining
set
officers
in
and enlisted
pretty
personnel who
high-bound
leave the
grades,
military
where we're
and are
taking
having
a number
difficulty
of
finding work in the
perhaps
private sector.
currently
This is a
unrelated
significant
occupations,
conversation in the
binding
private
them
sector.
together
What I
and
can
setting
tell you
wages
is
within
how
a
do we
few
create
steps for
opportunities,
that
how do we
grade.
translate the experiences of
Those grades
people
were
who come
established
from
back in the
military
70s,
and from the Department of
based
Defense
on the
into
prevailing
private
wages
sector
at that
jobs.
time, and
That
currently
creates an
been
opportunity for
together
the DoD,
occupations
because, in
that don't
fact, you
resemble
might
one another at
consider
all.
keeping
I believe
those
it
people.
far more effective approach would be to compensate on the occupational level, both with a view toward the local wage, but also understanding that should we need to draw workers into a labor market that's relatively undersupplied, it will take a higher wage to do so. We need to set wages cognizant of not only occupation locally, but also nationally.
It seems to me we're just going to basically have to
modifying the
give
recruitment
the
strategies,
department
including enhancing social media presence,
flexibility beyond
advertising,
specific
and employee referrals.
I believe that's the case.
So in
Johnson
summary,
and
got a lot
Mr.
more to
Taylor.
tell you, but Sherm's testimony
I would just
today
add,
underscores several
Senator, there's a
pivotal
very big
areas
issue
where
coming to you
organizations can
soon
concentrate
with
their
regard to
efforts
workplace
to attract,
surveillance, because the
retain,
tools for
and empower
surveilling
the workforce.
workers
Very
are
quickly
already greatly
adopt
enhanced.
skills-based
And in
hiring,
that conversation, there'll be,
invest in
and I think this is
retention,
something that OSHA will
leverage
be looking to Congress
apprenticeship
for guidance on.
programs, modernize talent
I think you have to consider
processes. This is,
to what extent
Mr.
surveillance
Wicker,
makes
Senator
workers
Wicker, a
safer,
real
more
challenge
productive,
for
and
the
lines up
government.
with reasonable
And we need
incentive
to
systems,
invest
as
in
Dr.
people
Lockwood was saying,
managers,
and to what extent it
upskill
becomes
and reskill
oppressive
the
and discourages
workforce,
workers from
create
coming
a
into work
culture
for
of
the defense
learning.
industrial base.
Employees
This is going to be a
want
very
this.
hot
They
issue
don't
very
want to
quickly,
take the job
and
and know
including
the job
that,
for
Senator
30
Wicker,
years and
in a
then
discussion
retire.
of the federal wage
Create
system
AI
could be quite a
responsibly.
good idea.
It's not a-
I would also emphasize the need for more housing. So one reason wages have to be higher in some areas is because that community decided not to build housing. Now, that's the decision of the community. It's not usually up to Congress. But I think deciding to spend
enough
your
to
submarine
just
dollars in places where
enable the
housing
technology,
is
but to do so
affordable
responsibly,
suggests
and
to
then
me
to
you'll be able
focus
to
on
build more
human
submarines for the same
and
wage bill.
machine collaboration.
And I would add,
at
from the
Sherm, we
private
speak a lot
sector
about
side, we
AI
use the term pay
plus
for
HI.
performance will equal
And
the
if Congress
ROI.
can do
So
anything
it's
to
not
give
a
flexibility game for employees, we've got to embrace this
government
technology,
workers,
and
the
we think
Department
there
of
are huge
Defense, you could actually
opportunities
help
for
there.
the Department of
Ultimately,
Defense.
people,
Thank
that
you.
doesn't surprise
Thank you,
me, the
Mr. Taylor. Dr.
19%,
Johnson, please.
Say only 19%.
Thank you, Senator. I'd
no
like to make
poor
3 points.
performers.
The first
government
is
has
about a
for
term that
quite a while
I fear you're going to hear
recruited people, and
increasingly,
part of the
which
sell
is
has been job
stranded
security.
expertise.
Well,
It's a
that's the
term being used in the
downside.
tech
If you know
sector
that
to
you're
refer to the impact of
job security, then there's
AI
no
in
incentive
particular.
necessarily
But of course, it's not a new
to do
problem. We've been
anything to
facing
not have
issues
your
with
job, but
expert
more
people who
importantly,
spend a
why
lot of
would you
time
differentiate
acquiring
if there
education
is
and
no
training,
pay for
losing
performance? If I'm
opportunities,
going
and being
to
left
give or
behind.
take
This
1% more than the colleague who does barely enough to get past, then there is no incentive for people to work harder and for you to attract the best talent.
Thank you, sir.
This has been a problem since at least the wave of automation. We've experienced this in the 1980s.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
shock
Chair,
of
and thanks to
Chinese
our witnesses.
imports
A
from the
couple
early
of
2000s
topics I want to get
exacerbated
into.
this.
First,
And in the age of AI, I think
Mr.
we're going to
Taylor,
be
I
seeing
appreciate
much
that
more
the
of this.
Society for Human
And of course, it's
Resource
overlaid,
Managers has
Senator
supported
Reid,
a
with
bill that
some
I
of
have
the
been promoting
issues you've talked about
for
in
many
terms
years.
of the demographics. I
I
would
talk
also
about
highlight
it
the
a lot
shift
in
of
the Health
innovation
Committee, and they're tired
away
of
from
talking
the
about it,
historical
but I don't
dispersion
talk
in the United
about
States
it a lot
towards
at
the
Armed
East and West
Services.
Coast.
The Jobs Act. We do not allow
And of course,
Pell
from a
Grants to be used
broader
for
social,
high-quality
economic
career
point of view, this is
technical
a problem.
education.
But my
It's gotta
second
be
point is,
college.
that
And an
this is
awful
actually
lot
an
of really
opportunity for the Department
high-quality
of
job
Defense
training
and
programs
a way to
are
think
not
about
college semester
responding
length
to the problems
instead of a
both you, Senator Reid,
15-week
and
course
Senator Wicker
that you
already
meet three
flagged.
times a week for an hour
Because
and a half.
the
A lot of
key point
high-quality
is that
job training is an 8-week course
innovation
where you're
and
5 days a
technology
week, 8 hours a
develops
day,
and is
many more
maintained
classroom
in
hours than a
particular
semester.
geographies around.
We allow Pell Grants to be used for full-time students, for part-time students, for people who are incarcerated, if they're getting college credits that they can use to get employed when they're back in society.
Hubs.
But we've
And
never
we
allowed
used to
Pell
have a lot
Grants
of
to be
hubs
used for
that were
high-quality
very
career and
dynamic in the
tech.
United States. Now we have
I think
fewer.
if we could
But
pass
that
the
can be
Jobs
addressed.
Act, and it's
The analysis we did suggests
wildly
there's over
bipartisan. I think
100
I've got about
urban
65
areas in
of my
36
colleagues
states
who
where
are
80 million
sponsoring
Americans
it,
live that
particularly
are
at a
ripe
moment
for
when we've just
stepping up
done
to
a big
become
infrastructure bill.
fantastic
Who's
places
gonna
for
build it? We've
exactly
just
the
done a
kind of
big
problems that
manufacturing
you're trying
bill.
to
Who's
solve
going to make?
and
We just made a
address on this
commitment
committee.
to
So
build
there
subs
is
with the
potentially
Australians,
available
but
labor.
both the
There
US
are
and
already
Australia have
skills.
some
There is
similar
no doubt some
workforce
retraining
challenges. So
needed and some
I
repositioning.
very much
Of course, one of the
appreciate,
problems with apprenticeship programs in the United States, one of the reasons the
supporting
private
the
sector
Jobs
doesn't,
Act, and I would look forward to
frankly
working
speaking,
with
love
my
them,
colleagues
is they're
to figure
afraid
out
that
some
once you
way
train a worker,
to
that
finally
worker
get
leaves and
moving
goes
on
to
it
work
at a
for a
time when the
competitor.
unemployment rate is
But if the
low.
goal is to strengthen the defense industrial
another
base, and if people are
topic that I'd like
sticky
to ask your
because we've all
opinion
become
on.
less mobile.
There's a
Modern
wonderful
Americans are much less
program
mobile
that
than
I've
our
been involved with
predecessors.
called the
Then if you-
Accelerated Training for Defense Manufacturing Program that is done in Danville, Virginia at the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research. And it's investment to build the submarine industrial base. And in that program, we bring
You're
people
training
from all
people in
over
a
the
particular
United
area
States
to
who
work
are
on
working
submarines,
with
for example, or to
suppliers
acquire
in the
welding
industrial
skills or
base, some of the
electrical
main
skills that are
shipyards,
relevant
but
to the
also
submarine
some
business,
suppliers.
and they leave to
They
a
train side by
related
side.
enterprise in
There's
that area.
Aussies there
You've
now,
not weakened
part
the
of the
defense industrial
AUKUS
base. You've actually
arrangement.
strengthened
But also, I
and
noticed the
deepened
last
its
time I
ties in
went,
that community.
there's a
You've
lot
also,
of
of course, got a
Afghans.
reserve workforce that can be
Afghans who
pulled in
served
if you need
patriotically
to
with the United
increase
States and
those
Afghanistan.
activities.
They moved
I
to the
think
United States
from
and they're
what I
like,
understand, Rhode
I'll
Island,
be a
Senator
shipbuilder.
Reid, you've got some terrific
Strikes me that one of the
hub-based
answers to this
developments, but we're seeing this
issue
all
on
around
workforce
the country, and
shortages is
CHIPS and Science Act, which
immigration.
was passed on a
An
bipartisan
immigration
basis,
reform
I think
system that
included an
prioritizes
affirmation of the
workforce
importance of this
is
as a
something that's
general
really
policy
important.
approach, but also
Oftentimes
something
when we talk
I would
about
say that
immigration
the
here,
DoD
it's all
can take on board.
about the border. And we ought to talk about
Included
the
in,
border, but
however,
we
in
also
that
need to
approach,
talk about the
Senator Reid would be
workforce.
addressing
An
one of the
unemployment
key
rate
points
that's
you
as
made,
low
which
as
is labor
ours
force
right now.
participation. So it's not enough to have
There's
the
not going to
opportunities.
be a solution to some of these problems that does not involve a work-based immigration reform. And I was hoping that you might just each offer your perspectives on that.
Well, Senator Ken, you
have to want
mentioned
to come to work,
something
and that's
that is
partly
at the
about
core of
compensation.
most
It's
of the
partly about having
conversations in
access to
human
childcare.
resource
It's partly
circles. The
about how
fact
long
of
does
the
it take to commute to
matter
work. There's a
is that
package
Americans
that
have
we
been
looked at
having
at this
fewer
club
and fewer
level,
children over
and
the
I
last 2 decades.
would commend
So we
that
have a
to
birth
this
rate
committee and to
problem.
the
We have a
DoD for further
replenishment
investigation,
problem.
where it overlays
And
with
so
your
we
existing
at Sherman are very
activities
careful not to get
and
into the
priorities
political issues
around
of
the country.
immigration, other than to
The
say
third
we
issue
need these
is,
8
I
or
think,
9 or 10 million
worth
jobs to
stating
be
out loud,
filled.
which is
And
China.
it is
I
just
think that's
nonsensical
on
that
the
we
back
would
of
in
all our
many
minds, or maybe
instances
the front,
have
Senator,
people
when we
who
think
we've
about
allowed to come to the
potential
U.S. We've
threats here.
educated them in our
And
schools,
China is, of
and then we
course,
send them back when
not just
we've
threatening, but
opened
actually
jobs for
investing
them
very
to
heavily
fill.
in further
So
research
again,
and
staying away
development,
from
trying
the
to move
political
innovation,
parts
trying to
of it,
own the
the
future of
reality is
jobs
employers are
across a
saying
lot
we
of
need
civilian, but also I think
this
military
talent. We don't have the luxury
And
of
the best way to
saying,
respond to
"Great,
that would be
we're going to have a
threefold.
bias
First of all,
against people who are not born trained here in the U.S. In fact, we need all the talent." So Sherman's quite supportive of this immigration. Now, how we get to that is a different issue. We need to ensure that we protect our border and our homeland.
It's
and we
more
need
in
to know who's
science
in our
for the United
country, is our
States.
opinion.
Secondly,
At that point,
figure out how to
getting them to
commercialize
the
and bring
talent,
more of those
matching them
activities
up
to
with
market, because
organizations
if you've got a
is
strong
something that
civilian
we
economy
all are
supporting
pushing
innovation,
for
that's going to
and
help you on the
frankly
military
demanding at this
side
point
also, and
with
obviously there's a huge amount of
3.7%
spillovers and
Dr. Johnson,
interaction there.
Lockwood.
And again, I would
So,
recommend the
Senator Kane, I
Hopkins
see
approach
your
to that.
two
And the
proposals
third
as very
approach,
tightly connected.
third
My
piece would be to
understanding is
develop
that
a
the
line
current
of
Pell
work
Grant
for
system had its origins in the 1958
pro-worker.
National
What do I
Defense
mean by
Education
pro-worker?
Act,
I mean,
which is itself
within
response
the
to
framework
Sputnik and a
Taylor's
realization
suggesting,
by Congress
AI
that we
is
needed
certainly
more
arriving,
engineers and
but is
scientists.
this
So
AI
there's
the
a big
big
push
push
to
at the
displace
higher end of
manual
education,
workers
math
and
and
displace,
science,
but not so much
education, or
does it enhance
that
middle skill area that we're talking about.
I think it
So
can
that's
actually
big,
go
but that's a
both
gap
ways.
we've
There's a
had
lot of
for a long
opportunity,
time.
a lot of
And
issues
I-
around
you're
healthcare, a lot of issues around education, a lot of issues around manufacturing.
Then when it
that
comes
are
to
not
immigration,
the
I
top
think the question
priority
is,
for AI
are we providing sufficient opportunities to all the people born in the United States, including in that middle area? And if we are, and they're not taking them, or if we still have gaps, then I think the case for immigration on a work-based or a skills basis, immigration reform is very compelling. MIT, I'm an immigrant senator, as you may have guessed, and I got a PhD from MIT, and there's many other people at MIT currently who would love to spend their careers building the economy and strengthening the national security of the United States. And many of them will be able to come in because we have changing the value. Not easy, but various points of entry manual skills. I think that's something we've lost in this country. But we don't do that for skilled labor because it's something we were very strong at during World War II. That was the basis of being able to scale up the economy and in that part of the labor force. But I think both your ideas together, to the extent we've outsourced those jobs to other places and created fragile supply chains, we should look at AI as an opportunity to motivate people and to
Dr. Lockwood, I'm
bring
over time,
technology
but
to bear
you
that
could be as
enhances
succinct as Mr. Taylor was earlier
effectiveness of that part of the workforce.
when he
Thank you.
closed over time.
Thank you
Yes.
very much, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Lockwood,
We
please.
absolutely need to invest in skills-based education, and we need to stop enshrining the four-year degree as the only valuable and worthwhile thing that a young person can do. We've overinvested in bachelor's
Chairman
degree
Reid,
education,
Ranking Member Wicker,
and
and fellow
underinvested
distinguished
in core
members
skills
of the
training.
Senate
So
Armed
that's something
Services
Congress should
Committee.
do now.
Good morning.
I'll just also note that
I'm honored to contribute to this timely discussion on trends
immigrant base
impacting
is
the
wildly
nation's
productive
defense
in
civilian
terms
workforce.
of new business starts
My
and general
perspectives are
entrepreneurship.
informed
And
by my own
skills-based
research,
immigration
that of
is
fellow
definitely
economists,
something that has been
and also
an
the work of
incredible
many
net benefit
talented
to the
researchers
American economy, and it ought to
at the
continue.
Institute for Defense Analyses
Thank you,
and at
Mr.
other
Chair.
federally
Thank you,
funded
Senator
research
Kane.
and development
Senator Tobey,
centers
please.
supporting the Department of Defense.
Thank
I
you, Mr.
should
Chairman.
state that the views that
I'd
I
also
express today
like
are
to
mine and not necessarily
add
those
on
of
to
IDA
Senator
as a
Kane's,
nonpartisan institution.
Thoughts on
To succeed, the Department of
Pell
Defense and
Grants,
its partners in the
government
defense
grants,
industrial
loans.
base must
I
maintain
spent 40
skilled,
years
capable,
in
and adequately
education
staffed
business.
workforces.
It's out of control. We need to use it for the right reasons. It needs to be redrawn. I've seen people take Pell Grants, go buy cars with them, drop out of school immediately after they got their Pell Grants. I've seen the same thing with loans.
Today's labor market is
there's not enough
characterized by the
oversight on it.
convergence of several important trends,
But
some
we
of
need
which
to
have been
put more
discussed today
emphasis
already,
on what we're doing.
which together
and what he's
produce
calling the Jobs Act.
intense competition
And we
for
get more out proud of it. If we would just
Increasing
concentrate
job
on
market
it
polarization,
and put some
driven by
authority behind
technological
it
advances,
and
has
let
left
people
many
know that
mid-skill
you've got to
workers
do it the right
behind.
way. And I'm all for
Young men's rates of
jobs
college
training,
attendance, enrollment, and
because I've seen a
completion
lot of
are in
these kids that go to
decline.
four-year universities
An
and waste
aging
their time
workforce
and get
will
degrees
bring
that they
waves
can't
of
get
retirements
jobs
to
when they get
DoD.
out. Their job has got to
threatening
be at Walmart or
continuity
somewhere
and
else like that.
also
And it's not that
institutional
Walmart's
memory.
a bad job. It's just
The gig
if you
economy,
spend 4
meanwhile,
years of
offers
your money or
workers
government's
low-commitment
money going to school,
alternatives
you
and a
need to
very
have some kind
flexible
of opportunity
lifestyle.
to achieve something.
And remote work is here
more
to stay in some
successful.
form
You
or
know,
other.
I come from Alabama.
In
and
addition,
we have a
affordable housing
industrial
shortages add
base
to
of,
existing downward pressure on worker
about 50
mobility
billion annually.
and rapid advances in AI.
300,000 jobs that work in our military industrial base. We have Alabama Shipyard in Austell, USA. We build ships, submarines, you name it. It's an amazing place. I
AI
enjoy
and other
going into these
technologies
buildings
are
and
accelerating
watching these
competition
people
for
work.
STEM graduates.
What's amazing to me, the stories
One
I
or
get
two of these concurrent
are
trends alone would be troubling,
from
but
some of these
taken
major
together, I
corporations
believe they
is that
represent a
they
sea change.
take their own initiative. They're going to fast food
At present,
places
there is
and
excess
recruiting.
demand for labor in the United States,
and
with
watching people
9.5
work.
million open positions for only
And
6.5
one,
million workers. And that's assuming every
Shipbuilder
worker
told
is
me
well
that
suited
their
to the
best
open
welders
positions, which they are
have
not.
come from fast food joints because they're willing
DoD
to
and
work.
its industry partners are not currently
Dr.
well
Lockwood,
positioned
be
to
careful.
compete
You
effectively
telling
for the
people to
high
get up off
demand
the
talent
couch
that our
and go to
national
work.
security requires.
You don't need to say that around here.
These trends
but
impact
they
each
do.
segment
We
of the
have
labor
gotta get
force that
people
this
back to
committee
work.
seeks to address.
So,
Wage
Dr.
grade
Johnson, you
workers
brought
in
up
our
a few minutes
shipyards
ago
and our
that
arsenals,
our
STEM professionals in our
workforce
labs
has
and in the
dropped since
acquisition
World War II.
workforce,
Well, we all know
and
that.
critical
I mean, that's a problem.
supervisors.
What's the cause and what's the solution to that? I mean, we got to have, what's the cause first? We all know we have to have the cause of that since World War II, and the solution. Is it NAFTA that we sent our manufacturing
and middle
overseas?
managers
Because China has
on
5
the
to 1
GS schedule.
manufacturing plants
A
compared to
common
us here in
set
the
of
United States.
prescriptions can
Is that
improve
part
the
of
health
it?
of each. To compete
Well,
for the skilled
Senator, when I
workers
think
that
of Alabama, I
DoD
think of
and its
Huntsville
partners
and the
in the
remarkable
industrial
success
base need
there
to
of the rocket
accomplish their
program,
critical
which was
missions, the
basically built from
department should
scratch
act
in a place that had
aggressively
tremendous,
to
no
hire
doubt, potential,
faster,
but had not previously
pay
established itself in that
competitively,
area of technology.
reward
And we used to do that a
performance,
lot, Senator. That was a
manage
big lesson
underperformance,
out of
and
World War
set
II.
the
We used to do it all
conditions
around the
needed
country.
for
The private
managers to
sector
make
did it
effective
as well as the
workforce
public
mix
sector.
decisions.
But unfortunately, what's happened due to market
Moreover,
forces, and so I'm not
DoD
blaming any
has an
individual,
excellent
is we've
opportunity
shifted
to
much
engage
more of
with
that
this
innovative
missing
activity towards the
middle
East
of
Coast and the
mid-skilled
West
workers.
Coast. These are cities that don't
A
like to
labor
build more
segment
housing. Price of
traditionally
housing is very
heavily
high. It's
involved
hard to
in
move
national
there.
defense.
A lot of the expertise
By filling critical
in the middle,
shortfalls
the middle
with a
skills
combination
part
of
of
trained
manufacturing, for
workers
example,
and
in the
enabling
Midwest of the United
technologies,
States,
some of the AI
is stranded there because the opportunities are other places, but they can't afford to move because of the housing market, and we're not making a best use of our talent. So I think more investments in more communities, including Alabama, which features very highly in our
that
book,
my
by the
colleagues
way,
here have spoken to
that's
already.
the right geographic approach
People
in
need
general
purpose
to
and
bolstering science
inspiration to get
technology.
off the
And when it
couch
comes to
and back
national
in the
defense,
workforce.
Senator, I think it lines up even better.
If you take away
Because
only
you
one
want to build- we
idea
want to build
from my time
communities
with you today,
with these
please let
skills.
that be
People don't
that
move
incentives
much.
matter.
Great. So those skills
By
will
incentives,
stay in this
I do
community
not
that's
only
focused on
mean the
producing
pay and
submarines
benefits
or
that employees
rockets or
might
whatever
earn for
that
an
community
excellent
is.
performance.
That's going to be a
I also
very
mean the
strong local
conditions
regional
under which
defense base. So
DoD's many
we'll use a little bit
managers,
of our
workers, and researchers
disadvantages
invest their
in our
personal
favor
effort
in this case,
and make
I think we'll
day-to-day
get a better
decisions that
economy
impact
and
the
more
department's
national
bottom
security as a
line.
result.
Yeah, and
I
think
believe that
still in our
DoD's
country, we
dedicated
still
workers
have a lot of
generally want to
patriotism
make
out there.
optimal
Sometimes we
choices,
don't see that,
but are often
people wanna
stymied in
work
doing
for our
so.
military industry.
You
And,
can set
and they
the
make
conditions to
very good
align
money.
incentives
I mean,
within
but
these
you gotta
decision
pay a price, You got to
environments
sacrifice.
to make it
And we
easier
can't-
for everyone
we
to
can't overlook our education in this country. Our education is going south. Take it from somebody that's been in high schools all over this country as my former job. The things that we're teaching are not conducive
choose the sensible thing
to
for the
push these young
mission
men and women
and
in
for the
making better
taxpayer
for
in their
themselves.
daily work.
I mean, they just
Whether
say,
that
if I
is
get a
shaping
degree,
DoD's workforce
or if I get a
mix or when
diploma in
managing
high
their
school, That's
teams.
good enough.
Incentive
And that's really not
alignment
good enough.
will
They've
produce
gotta be
more effective
incentivized
decisions
on
and
how to
free
do it. Now,
resources
Mr. Taylor
for
was
other
talking
mission
earlier
critical
about that.
areas. I
You know, we got
personally
to
think we could use a few
incentivize.
more submarines.
But again, it all goes back to our
Decisive
military industry.
action
As you
can
said,
help
Huntsville,
achieve this
it is
incentive
growing.
alignment.
I just bought a new house
And
up
will
there. I watched it
reinvigate
go up, okay?
DoD's civilian
There
workforce
wasn't,
by clearly
in the
signaling
entire
that the
time
department
that
values
house was built,
its wage
there
grade,
wasn't one
professional,
white
and
American,
defense industry
Black
personnel
American,
that it will
or
recognize and
Asian
reward their
American that worked on
contributions.
that house.
These innovations will allow
was people from
DoD
other
to advance
countries.
as a high-performing organization.
I don't know whether they were
Thank you for
legal
your
or not.
time,
They said they
and
were.
I look forward
And
to
I
your
asked them, I said,
questions.
make sure there's not, I happen to be a
thank you
senator,
all
make
for
sure there's
excellent
people
testimony.
that are Americans that are working on this house. But we can't build anything. We can't build anything unless we have immigration in this country. I truly believe that. I truly believe that, but we got to do it the right way. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Rosen, this is, I think, a beginning of a
Well, thank you,
dialogue,
Chairman
not,
Reed,
a one-stop,
for holding this
uh,
hearing. I'd
and
also
move
like
on.
to thank each of the
And
witnesses, of course,
like
for
submarines, but
testifying
I share that
today.
with Senator Wicker.
And I
only
worked
Here,
in
here.
my former career in
The
STEM,
only
and
thing
so
I
I'm going to
take
talk a little
issue
bit
with
about
is
the
she said
STEM
a few.
workforce
We
shortage.
need
And as mentioned
quite a
in the
lot more
National
submarines.
Defense Industrial Strategy,
agree.
we have
The
to
only
find
condition he
creative
puts on, they all
solutions to
have to be
upskill
named
our
after a city in
manufacturing
Mississippi,
workforce
but
so that
that's a
we
small
can meet
point.
our nation's strategic production
One of the issues
targets
that
and our
I
goals.
see as
And
I
so,
try to
Mr.
deal with
Taylor,
these
can you
issues
speak
is
to the
that
labor
we
shortages
have a
in
problem
STEM
bringing
fields,
in,
the impact in our defense industrial base, and if there's
new
specific
workers.
sectors
We also have a
impacted by the
problem
skilled
at
workforce
the supervisory
shortage
level.
more
And
than
our,
others?
discussions
As you can imagine,
with,
thank you, Senator Rosen.
people in the industry say
You know,
that
one of the problems is we wait too long to talk about what the talent problem is. We look to employers and say, you've not hired enough engineers this year, for example. The reality is this is a
that's
PK
probably
through
one
12
of the
problem.
key things that is slowing
And
them
we
down.
are not looking at it. We want
They
to solve
can get
for it
by with
immediately.
younger
We have a
workers, but
pipelining
without the
problem
supervisors,
from
they can't
the
leverage
diversity,
those workers.
for
So,
example,
Mr.
of
Taylor
the types
and
of
Dr. Johnson,
Americans
Dr.
who
Lockwood,
come through
your
the systems,
comments.
K through 12 education.
Well, indeed,
we
so
know
I alluded to that. Thank
disproportionately
you,
underperform
Chairman
in
Reed.
communities,
We know
underrepresented minorities,
that,
and then you wake up
even
and
in
say,
industries
we don't
like
have
the tech
enough diverse talent in Silicon
Well,
Valley.
it's
because
tech
that
industries.
started
We
13,
can get
14 years ago
employees
and
to
didn't
come
start
in. The
immediately.
difficulty is
And so
keeping those
employers are
employees.
committed to
And
the
increasingly,
idea
the new
of
difficulty is
increasing
keeping
and
people
solving
in
for
middle
their STEM
management,
worker
in part
talent shortages,
because we've
but
naively
we know when we
assumed
say
that
it,
because
term
one
is the
is
two
a
E's.
great
It's
mechanic
education
that
and
won't be a
employers.
great
We've got to
manager
start
of
a lot earlier in
mechanics.
the process.
And so we take that person,
The
we
other
don't
thing that the
invest
senator
in
just spoke
teaching
to
them how to be
is that
a great
increasingly
people.
companies are going straight to high schools and saying, in fact, some new instances of going to middle schools and saying, I'm going to identify your kids now, ensure that they are obtaining the skills that we need to, the STEM skills,
Manager,
the basic math,
they hate the job,
sciences,
and
et cetera,
employees
and
that
we
work for them
essentially
hate
are
the
going to
job,
pull
and
them
therefore
through
no
and
one
mentor
wins,
them
and
so
that
that
has
we
led
have
to the retention problem.
potentially
So one of the
employable
areas that we
people
strongly
10, 12
recommend
years
the
later
Department
as
of
opposed
Defense
to
hoping
consider
that the
doing
K
is
through 12
investing
system
in
will
people
provide a
management.
pipeline.
How do you,
Well, I'm
it's
glad
not
you
enough
brought
for
that up
someone to
because
have
my
the
very
technical,
first
the
bill is
underlying
called Building
technical
Blocks of
skills.
STEM,
You've got to
and it
teach
does
them
exactly that
technically to do the job,
and
but
allows
teach them
to build
how
that
to
STEM
manage
pipeline
people.
K through
Because,
12,
listen, at the end of
schools
the day,
all
we've all
across
talked about
America to
compensation,
invest in STEM
compensation does
education.
matter,
And
but
I've
all of
seen
the
the
data
greatest
tells us that
programs in
people will
kindergarten
leave
and
an
elementary
employer
school.
if the
They
only
kind
thing
of
they're doing is
use little
making a lot of money,
robotics
but being
and
mistreated, and they
fun
don't
things. The
find
kids don't
that
even
this is a
realize
good
they're
work
learning
environment. So
STEM, but they're
people
learning
management
all of these
work is a lot
great
of the work that the
things of
Department of
logic.
Defense should
So thank you
consider
for
investing
bringing
in.
that up, and I was glad to have the
Dr.
bill passed
Johnson,
to
your
do
comment.
that. But I'm going to move on to Dr. Johnson. As DOD, we're going to focus on partnering with the private sector. We know that's really important to increase our workforce preparedness.
Senator Reid, I think there's a
How
good
can the
news, bad
department
news
expand
aspect to
its
artificial
outreach
intelligence
to
in answer to
encourage
your question. The
more
good news is
of the private sector
there is definitely
in
potential,
the
and we can
advanced
see it already
manufacturing
in some parts of the
process.
private sector, to develop tools that will
Well, I think
enhance
that's
the
a great
ability of
question,
supervisors,
Senator,
and
and
I
I
think
think
focusing
focusing
on
on
perhaps make it
hubs,
more
areas,
easy to
geographies
transition
where
to
the
become
private
a
sector
supervisor.
has the
So
potential,
I don't think
where
there's
you
enough
can-
effort going
you
to that. I
have
think
the
there's
labor
something
force, you have the
very good for
potential
the DoD
labor
to
force,
focus on
including
also.
with your,
But I think that the
ample
bad
STEM
news part
initiative.
is,
There is
and
also
thinking about where
tendency,
housing
and
can
also
also
be built,
I'm
Senator
sure
Rosen,
in
I
this
think
room,
too
but
often
elsewhere,
there's great
to
opportunities
think
in
about
places where the
algorithms
communities don't want to
as
build housing, so
replacing
the houses
people
become
and doing the
super
work, and we can
expensive, then you
rely
have
on
to
them,
pay
and
a
we
very
can
high wage,
close
or
our eyes and the
nobody's
car
gonna
will
move
drive
there.
itself. That's
So
a
I
bad
think looking for
mistake.
those geographic
But what we're looking at,
partnerships
as
something
Mr.
that
Taylor
has
said,
not
is different ways for
previously
people to
been
interact with machines
Well,
at the
this isn't for
supervisory level. But I
defense,
would
but we're
emphasize
becoming a new
making
tech
those
hub in
manual
Reno,
jobs
and
more
this
attractive,
is the
more
kind of thing
interesting,
that we're talking about
pulling
happening,
younger people in with an
Nevada.
AI
But I'm going to
element.
move on to Dr. Lockwood quickly because I want to talk about the impact of budget delays. I know the impact, failure to pass a full-year funding deal, including for the DoD, it constrains
Not
our
thinking about
long-term
replacing
strategic
people,
plans.
because that,
It has
would be
negative impacts for all of our prime
Dr.
contractors, for our
please.
subcontractors.
Yes,
They
I'll
can't
just build
prepare and plan,
on
and
both
when
of
you
these
can't
gentlemen's
plan, you
remarks
can't
by
have the
noting I
workforce. And if you lose
wholeheartedly
the talent
support
workforce
Mr.
and they go
Taylor's
somewhere else for a
cry
job,
for additional
they
training.
may
I'll note
not
that
come back, and it
among
takes a
our
long
defense
time to build a
workforce,
qualified
that our uniformed
welder for a
personnel are
submarine
frequently
and all
sent
of
to
those
special
kinds of
schools
things.
to
So
learn
if we're going to
managerial
build
and
those
leadership
resilient
skills.
supply chains for our
However,
defense industrial
very
base,
little
Congress
investment is
must
made
pass
in our
regular
civilian
appropriations in a timely
managers.
manner. So,
And,
Dr. Lockwood, can you
this
talk
is
to us
this is a
about
critical
the
gap
federal,
that
the
you can
impact
fill.
of the federal
I will
funding
note that some
uncertainty
important
all
changes
across our
have been
defense
made,
industrial
some
base,
progress has
what
been
that
made in the
really
area of
means
leadership
for our safety
training
and security
for the
across
acquisition
world.
workforce in
Absolutely.
particular. But
I do
leadership is
view
different than management.
uncertainty in
So
the
this timing of
this is
federal
a
budgets to have a very negative impact on our total readiness posture. In addition, I would say that further dampens interest in federal employment by creating the perception of
key
turmoil and
opportunity
an
for the
unnecessary
department.
politicalization of these
much.
critical roles that we
In
need
terms
filled.
of,
I'll also add that particularly for young people who are just
addressing our
entering their
problems,
careers, extremely long delays
one
in time to
suggestion that I
hire
think everyone made
often become
directly and
untenable.
indirectly
They
is
have loans
we've got
looming,
this
they need to
pool
start work
of,
immediately, they can't afford
workers,
to wait
military
12 months
personnel that we
to be
can
certain of
transition.
having a
And
job.
just
So
very
this
quickly,
is something
because
that we
my
can
time
address.
is expiring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr.
Thank you
Chair,
very much,
how do we,
Senator Rosenstein.
Senator Sullivan,
Thank you, Mr.
encourage
Chairman, and I
military
appreciate the
personnel who are leaving the service
Witnesses
to go
today on
into
a really, really
industries-related?
important
Yes, we
topic.
know that there currently exist
By the way, I
transition
agree
programs,
100%
but
with Senator
we've got to double down on those. If we
Kane
know
on
that
his
an
Jobs
individual
Act.
is
I think
within
it's
6
something-
months to
and
12
Senator
months
Tuberville
away
and
from
what
either
we do,
retiring
and
or
I think it's a
complete.
really good opportunity, and we should keep moving forward on that. As you know, when we're looking at our strategic competition, one of the things that the dictators in Beijing,
Leading
Xi
their
Jinping
military
and others
service,
are
we've got
really
to give them the
scared
skills
about is
to
our
make sure that
submarine
they can
force.
translate that either
It's an
to a
asymmetric
role in the
advantage
DIB,
that
maybe not necessarily in
still
the
very
military,
significant,
or
and,
within the private sector.
they're
So
terrified by
training
it,
them
which is
on
why we
how
should be
to become
building a lot
recruitable
more
in the private sector
submarines.
would be the way to do it.
I met
Thank
with
you.
the CNO of the
my
Navy
time is
yesterday
fine.
and
There's
just
one
talked
other
about
question that
how there's
I
so
want-
much
or comment I
bipartisan
wanna put
interest
on
here in the Congress
table. One is
to
Dr. Lockwood focused on the acquisition forces in DOD.
increase
and
our
management
capacity to
training.
build
One of the
ships
areas I
and
think too is
subs.
in the civilian companies, the
My
contractors.
staff had done some research
my
for me.
sense is they
We have the
don't do that
capacity,
very
we've done
well.
it before.
Is
A lot of people don't know
Dr.
our
Jones?
country had a two-year head
I
start
would respectfully
before
take a
Pearl
question
Harbor
on the management within.
increasing our ship capacity. So in 1937, we had 335 ships
in
in
our contractual
fleet.
partners for the
By
record.
Pearl Harbor,
Very good, thank you. Dr. Johnson?
December 7th,
I
1941, we had
think
790.
you're pressing on exactly the right
So we
issue
doubled the
here,
size of the
Senator
fleet.
Reid. I think
Before we
we're
got into a war.
underinvesting in managerial capabilities across a
dangerous
large
time
part of our
right now.
economy. And of course, there's a big sucking sound
analogous
as
to
talent
the
gets pulled towards
1930s, in my
the Silicon
view.
Valley type of sector,
a
and the
lot
rest
of
of the
what
economy
happened was
is neglected
Congress
and
acted
underinvested in by itself, which is
Four
very
laws in
counterproductive
particular,
from an economic point of view
Vision
and from a national
Trammell Act, the
security point of view.
Second
So I
Vision
think
Trammell Act, the
you know,
Naval
this is
Expansion
absolutely
Act of
top priority in line
1940,
with both,
and the
with certainly what
Two
Mr. Taylor said,
Ocean
I'm sure
Navy
with
Act
what Ms. Lockwood will say later.
1940.
Last word very quickly, Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
So I want to start with you, Dr.
Senator Wicker,
Lockwood.
please.
What are the big
Thank
ideas?
you, Mr. Chairman. In a
Big ideas.
2023 Federal
We've done this
Employee
before,
Viewpoint Survey,
Right? We don't want to start building our industrial base out once the bullets start flying. The time to do it is now. And we've done this before. We have the capacity to do it as a nation before. What are the big ideas that you think we need?
workers were asked
Particularly as it relates
whether
to
they
subs.
agree with this
The estimates
statement.
are
In my work unit,
we need over
differences in
100,000
performance are
new
recognized in
trained
a meaningful
workers.
way. Only 45%
But I think the bipartisan nature of what
respondents
is
agreed
needed,
with that. The same survey
We would be open to
asked
anything,
this
even a new
question,
shipyard.
asked if they agree with this statement.
what are the big ideas?
There are
I
no
wanna hear
poor
from you
performers in my
very
work unit.
briefly, and then
Only
the others, if you
19%
can
of
actually
employees said that.
respond in a request for the record, and then
Dr. Lockwood, in your
Dr.
written statement,
Johnson,
you
I have a
say
quick
DOD
question
needs
for
to
you
accelerate
on what's happening in
reprimand
Silicon Valley. But
or
Dr. Lockwood,
separation in
the
cases
biggest thought
of
pieces you can
underperformance
do.
that does not improve with
Thank you.
reasonable training.
Let me quickly say
investment.
that
Tell us about that.
the
and
submarine
what
force
can-
is near and dear to my heart as the wife of a currently serving commander of a fast attack boat forward deployed in Guam, the USS Asheville.
Well, Xi Jinping is scared to death of what your husband has to bear.
Indeed,
Congress did.
I believe that to be a
we need
true
a
fact,
lot-
sir.
we need
Thank
a
you
lot
for the
more of them.
question. Yes. I
think
do
the bottom
believe
line is
the
that
analysis
if
I've
high
seen has
performers
indicated
are
there's simply no
compensated,
way
promoted,
that this
otherwise
country can
treated
meet
the
its
same
own needs
as
and also
mediocre
support its
performers,
AUKUS
that those
commitments
high
without an
performers will be
additional
discouraged
shipyard.
and take their talent somewhere else.
Our
So you agree with
capacity,
the idea of additional
so I think
shipyard?
I do
A public shipyard?
Pretty clearly say
I
that
think
that's
we need
suboptimal
all
for the
available
department.
options, sir.
Okay.
I think there are a number of things the department could do. I would
to,
be open to performing
enable
additional
managers.
analysis to try and
One
determine
thing
exactly
is
what
perhaps
format would be
to
most
limit
effective.
employment terms.
But I'll note
So,
that in World War II,
one might imagine
tanks
a new
rolled off
form
the
of federal
floor
employment, a limited
of the Ford
term
plant.
contract. We
And
see
they're-
this in
they're damn
several
proud
other
of it, and they
developed
should be.
economies.
This
Good. Well,
would
if you
kind
can
of
get back
split the
to us
difference,
with more
perhaps,
details
between
on that
the use of
idea
a
and other
very
big think ideas on this, the way the Congress Congress acted prior to World War II. Very impressive. Dr. Johnson, real quick, I agree with Senator Tuberville that there's still very
Very
much
flexible,
patriotism in
contracted
our
solution,
country that wants
through
to
a-
help.
through a-
One of the
one of our
ironic
industrial-based
areas that
partners
I've kept
or
a
a typical
close
federal
eye on over
contractor,
the last several years is
and
the return
what
of
we understand
patriotism
now
in
as
Silicon
federal
Valley.
employment, to give both
10
the
years ago, they didn't
department
have
and
it,
the
right?
worker
You know,
added flexibility.
they were much more interested in working with the goddamn Chinese communists than
Okay, so I
American
asked what
military
Congress could
industrial
do, and do you
capabilities.
think it would
That's
take
changing.
statutory
It's a great opportunity for
changes
us as a
to
country.
implement something
It's a
like that?
strategic advantage that Chinese and
I
Russians
do,
don't have.
in particular
But
because
the Pentagon's
oftentimes both
culture
civilian and
in
uniformed
rules
manager
don't
have
allow
concern
don't
of
allow us to take advantage of it. You've heard this phrase, the
reprisal
valley of
or
death.
other forms
right? You have a
of
high-tech company's got great
unfortunate
capacity,
action
can't
should
break
they
into the
do
Pentagon
the hard
system,
work of trying to separate.
and then the company goes out of business because it takes 5 years to get the Pentagon interested. What is your thoughts on what we can do to enhance the ability
a
of our
non-productive
industrial
member of the
capacity
staff.
to
So,
take advantage of this
Congress
new
clearly signaling that this
interest
is your intent and desired
with some of
outcome,
our
I believe would be
high-tech
helpful to
companies
the
who want to
department.
help us.
Let me
wanna
ask
help
all of you
America
about the
be
federal
strong
wage system.
and not fund the Chinese
It's
like
not
so
been
many of them
reformed
used to do,
since
which was very
72. It's going to be a long time.
pathetic and un-American in my
It
view.
has weaknesses such as
Yes,
the
so
system
I
in
think
determining
you're spot on with that
the wage
overall
is
characterization.
hyperlocal.
I think you need some carrots.
It's
It could be
incredibly
prizes, it could be
bureaucratic
prestige,
and
things that
complicated.
pull those tech companies towards the
And
problems
by
that you
law,
want them to
public
solve.
unions,
Because if we leave
public
them to their own
employee
devices,
unions
we know what they're going to
are
do. It's more
heavily
social media, it's more digital
involved.
ads. I don't
Dr.
think that
Lockwood,
particularly
let's
helps
start with
national
you.
defense at all. So I think defining, using DARPA
in my
type
opening
approach,
statement, I
and
mentioned
define this is
welders
the
and
problem to be
electricians.
solved,
The Navy's
which could be a
public
direct military
shipyards are
problem, or it could be
struggling to hire
healthcare related to the military,
and
it could be transitioning military personnel to civilian, it could be education more broadly. There's a lot of really important goals that matter a lot to you on this committee, and Silicon Valley pays zero or almost zero attention to them. I will also, by the way, Senator, send you some enhanced, some reinforcement for your talking points on the role of submarines in World War II, the role of U.S. innovation on
believe
naval
it does.
aircraft prior to World War II, which was absolutely huge,
so
and the fact that this country was
currently
producing roughly
wages are set
one aircraft carrier
in
per month
pretty
at its peak in World War II,
high-bound
because we were able to
grades where we're
move so
taking
much
a
of our
number of
production when it
perhaps
was needed,
currently
but not
unrelated
prematurely.
occupations,
So you're right about the base.
binding them
bill.
together and setting
Anyway, Senator, I'll
wages
follow up
within a
with you
few
directly.
steps
Thank
for
you.
that
Thank you, Mr.
grade.
Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.
Those grades were
Senator
established
Warren,
back in the
please.
70s.
Thank you,
based
Mr.
on the
Chairman,
prevailing
and thank you
wages
for
of that
holding
time
this
and
hearing
currently been
on
together
workforce
occupations that don't
dynamics.
resemble one
the
another at
strong
all.
economic
I
recovery
believe
under
a far
President
more
Biden
effective approach would
is
be
a
to
win for the
compensate
United
on the
States. We have
occupational level,
14.8 million
both
jobs
with a view
created,
toward the local
fastest
wage,
growth
but
in
also
real
understanding
inflation-adjusted wages of any recovery in more than half a century. But there is still work to do. We need to invest in our defense manufacturing workforce and make sure that we have the workers that are needed to meet our
should we
national
need to draw
security
workers
needs.
into a labor market that's
One
relatively
tool that
undersupplied.
I'd like us to
It will
talk
take a
about for
higher
making
wage
sure
to
that
do
the
so. We
labor
need to set
supply
wages
keeps up with the
cognizant of not
labor
only
demand
occupation locally,
is
but also
providing the
nationally.
quality, affordable
We're,
childcare
it seems
that
to me we're
workers
just
need
gonna
so they can
basically,
actually go to work. You know, we do
have
this
to
to some
give the
degree already,
department,
including with the DOD's
flexibility
excellent
beyond
child care
specific
program.
instructions.
But while
I
we
believe that's the
could
case.
invest
Johnson
a whole
and Mr.
lot
Taylor.
more for our military
I
and
would just
our
add,
civilian families.
Senator, there's a very big
Over
issue
half
coming to
of
you
Americans
soon
right now
with regard
live
to
in
workplace
childcare
surveillance, because the
deserts. That
tools for
means
surveilling
children
workers are already
outnumber
greatly
the
enhanced.
childcare
And in that
slots
conversation,
by
there'll be,
3
and I
to
think this
1,
is something that OSHA
and
will be
that
looking to
means
Congress for
millions of
guidance on.
families across the country that
I
need
think you have to
childcare
consider,
and either can't find it, or if they can find it, they can't afford it. Professor Johnson, you're an economist at MIT, former chief economist at the IMF. So let's do some Econ 101.
To what extent that surveillance makes
and
workers
drill down
safer,
on the
more
root of this
productive, and lines
problem.
up with reasonable
How does
incentive systems, as
insufficient
Dr. Lockwood was
supply
saying,
of
and to what extent it
childcare
becomes oppressive and
affect
discourages
labor
workers from coming into
supply,
work for the
including
defense
the
industrial
defense
base.
workforce?
This is going to be a very hot issue very
lack of
quickly,
adequate
and
childcare
including
obviously
that,
limits
Senator,
the
we're
ability
in a
in a
discussion of the
participate,
federal wage
in the
system
workforce,
could
and
be
of course many of
quite a
those
good
aircraft
idea.
carriers
I would
and
also
submarines that
emphasize
were
the
built in
need
World
for
War
more
II were built
housing.
by women.
So one reason wages have to be higher in
not
some
enough
areas is
childcare
because
means
the
not enough
community
workers
decided
to
not to
power
build
our
housing.
economy in the
Now
defense
that's the decision
industry
of the
and
community. It's
basically
not usually up to
everywhere else.
Congress.
But let's go down
I think
one more level
deciding
on
to
this.
spend your submarine
Professor
dollars in
Johnson,
places
help
where
us
housing is
understand the
affordable
bottleneck
suggests
in
to me you'll be able to
childcare.
build more submarines
If
for
we
the same
want to
wage
increase the
bill.
supply of childcare,
And I would add, from the
what's the
private
key
sector
input
side,
that
we
we need
use the
more
term
of?
pay for performance.
You need more people willing to
And
work in the
if Congress
childcare
can do
program.
anything to give
Okay, so we need more
flexibility
child care
to
workers
the,
to help
government
unlock
workers.
this labor supply across the board. How can we do that? Why don't we just pay child care workers more money?
Well, that is the best idea. I think that is what would work. But just to emphasize, that these childcare centers, for the most part,
Department of
operate on
Defense, you
razor-thin
could actually
margins.
help
So
there.
there's not much else
Ultimately,
to squeeze.
people,
And
it doesn't
the money
surprise
that's
me
paid
that
by parents
19%
goes to the
say
childcare
only
workers, but the
19%
parents can't
have
afford
no
to pay the
poor
childcare workers
performers.
enough to pull
government
people
has
into
for-
that childcare
for
work.
quite a while
So the market,
recruited
I'm
people,
afraid,
and what
Senator
part of
Warren,
the
is failing
sell
us
has
here.
been job
Okay, so the
security.
market fails.
Well, that's the
but
downside.
DOD
If you know
has
that you have
stepped
job
up.
security, then there's no
DOD
incentive
Child Development
necessarily
Centers
to do
cap
anything to
fees
not have your
at
job.
7%
But more
of family
importantly, why would
income,
you
and the federal
differentiate if
government
there is
picks
no pay
up
for performance?
the
If
rest
I'm
of the
going to make,
cost.
give or
It
take
is
1%
a worthwhile
more
investment
than
in
the colleague
military
who does
readiness.
barely enough to get
But
past,
DOD
then there
has
is no
not
incentive for
updated
people
its
to work
pay
harder
scale
and
for
for you to
child care
attract
workers
the best
for
talent.
30 years now.
Thank you, sir.
And unsurprisingly, DOD is struggling to attract the workers it needs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and
Meanwhile,
thanks to our
federal
witnesses. A
investments
couple
in
of
civilian child care fell off a cliff last year when the pandemic funding ended, and that exacerbated child care shortages. So, Professor Johnson, if the federal government stepped up
topics
its
I want to get
investments
into.
in
First,
child care,
Mr. Taylor, I
particularly
appreciate
to
that the Society for Human
increase childcare
Resource
worker
Managers has
pay,
supported a bill
what
that I have been
impact would
promoting
that have
for
on
many
the
years.
defense workforce?
I talk about it
I
a
think it
lot
would
in the
strengthen
Health
the defense
Committee, and they're
workforce. More
tired of me
women would
talking
be able
about
to
it,
go to
but I don't
work.
talk
You'd also
about it a
have
lot
more
at Armed
opportunity for
Services.
women to build the
Jobs
skills
Act.
that we've all been talking
We
about.
do
We're
not allow
emphasizing
Pell
across
Grants to be
all
used for
range of
high-quality
skills
career and
earlier
technical
in their careers.
education.
So instead of having to
It's gotta
take
be
some
at
years
college.
out of the labor force, they would continue to be engaged.
And an
And that's
awful lot
really
of
important
really
for having
high-quality
supervisory
job training
talent, for
programs
example, when you
are
when you
not
reach a certain
college
age.
semester
And
in
I
length
take it,
instead of a
Mr. Taylor, do you
15-week
agree with
course
this?
that you meet
Not only
3
do
times a week for an
agree,
hour and a
it's an
half.
issue
A lot
that,
of high-quality
you're
job
increasingly
training is
seeing
an
on the
8-week
private
course
sector
where
side.
you're 5 days a week,
Corporations
8
are
hours a day,
underwriting,
many
and
more
we don't
classroom
have
hours than a
a
semester.
50-year-old lag in
We
terms
allow
of
Pell Grants to
compensation.
be used
So
for
many,
full-time students,
increasingly,
for part-time
organizations are building
students,
their own
for
childcare
for people who
facilities and fully subsidizing them to draw talent in and to retain that talent. The other thing, though, Senator Warren, that I think is really important is increasingly we speak about, and we're seeing this in all of our data,
who are
it's
incarcerated,
dependent
if they're
care.
getting college
So
credits
more
that they can
than
use to
just
get
child
employed
care.
when
Many
they're
of us find
back in
ourselves
society,
in the middle of this
but we've
sandwich
never allowed
generation
Pell
where
Grants to
you
be used for
have to
high-quality
decide
career and
not
tech.
to go take a job because
I
no one
think
is there
if
to
we could
provide
pass
for
the
your
Jobs
elderly
Act, and it's
parents or grandparents.
wildly
So we are
bipartisan.
seeing
I
a
think I've got about
big
65
theme
of
in
my
all of our
colleagues
data
who
that
are
says not only
sponsoring it,
childcare, but
particularly at a
broadly
moment when we've
dependent
just done
care.
a big
So I think this is
infrastructure
terrific.
bill.
You know,
Who's going to
I'm
build
all
it? We've
for
just done a
building
big
a strong
manufacturing bill.
defense
Who's going to make it?
manufacturing
We've just made a
workforce,
commitment
the
to build
topic
subs
we're
with
here
the
today to
Australians,
discuss.
but both the
But
U.S.
let's treat
and
it like the
Australia
supply
have
chain
some similar
issue that
workforce
it is,
challenges. So
and
I am
address
very
root
much
causes
appreciate
like underinvestment in
SHRM
child care
supporting
and
the Jobs
dependent
Act, and I
care
would look
and
forward to working with my
childcare
colleagues to
workers.
figure out some
I'm
way
glad to be
to
working
finally
with
get
members
movement
of
on
this
it at a
committee
time
to
when the
invest
unemployment
in
rate
the
is low.
DOD's child care
To another-
program. I want to call out my partner in this, Senator Scott. We're working on this in our subcommittee, and we're going to keep fighting for affordable child care for our defense workforce and for
Topic
all
that I'd like to
Americans.
ask
Thank
your
you,
opinion on.
Mr. Chairman.
There's a
Senator
wonderful
Warren.
program
Scott, please.
that I've been involved with called
I
the
wanna thank
Accelerated
Warren.
Training for
We've had a
Defense
good subcommittee
Manufacturing
on
program
personnel.
that is
having
done
one
in
this
Danville,
afternoon.
Virginia, at
It's
the
gonna talk about,
Institute for Advanced Learning and Research. And it's
injuries
investment
from,
to build the submarine
I guess
industrial
more
base.
noise, yeah.
And in that
So it's
program,
gonna
we
be-
bring
it'll be
people from
interesting
all over the
because we
United
gotta
States
deal
who
with
are
this.
working with suppliers
So
in the
here's what I
industrial
don't
base, some of the
understand.
main
You know how many
shipyards,
full-time
but
jobs
also
have been
some
added in the country in
suppliers.
the last
They
last
train
3
side by
months?
side. There's Aussies there
Anybody
now,
know?
part of the AUKUS arrangement.
We've lost
But also I
1.5
noticed the last time I went,
We're adding
there's a
part-time
lot of
jobs.
Afghans. Afghans
So
who
you're trying to
served
figure out why is this
patriotically with the
happening?
United States.
When
In
I was,
Afghanistan, they
I
moved
became
to the United
governor
States
at
and
the,
they're like,
at the
I'll
end
be a
of
shipbuilder.
a big downturn. I
Strikes
became
me that
governor
one of the
January
answers to
2011.
this issue
And
on
I
workforce
went to a
shortages
National
is
Guard.
immigration.
They were coming back from overseas, and they had 30% unemployment. And And then I ran my whole campaign on getting people jobs. I said I'd get 700,000 jobs. And so I tried to figure out how to
immigration
get that
reform
done.
system that
So we just tried to
prioritizes
figure out-
workforce
I had to go recruit
is something
companies
that's
every
really
day to
important.
try to get them to come to
Oftentimes, when we
Florida,
talk
'cause
about
people were moving
immigration
out
here,
of
it's all
Florida back in
about the
2010
border.
when I got elected.
And we ought to talk about
So we did a variety
but
of
we also
things.
need to talk about
First
the
off,
workforce.
we-
An unemployment rate that's as low
You know,
as
we,
ours
at the
right
federal
now.
government, we give a lot of money to our states.
There's not going to
to,
be a
for
solution to
workforce
some of these
boards.
problems that does
And
not
do you know how many
involve
people
a work-based
they were filling
immigration
jobs for?
reform. And I was hoping that you might
Nobody
just
had any
each offer
idea.
your
There was
perspectives
no
on that.
measurement. So the first thing is we
Senator
required
Ken,
them
you-
to give
you
us a
mentioned
daily report.
something that is at
It was
the
over-
core of
yeah, I think it
most
was
of the
250 over
conversations in
$250
human
million
resource
a year
circles.
that
The
we're
fact of the
spending
matter,
off federal
matter
money.
is that Americans have been
That's
having
number one.
fewer
Number
and
two
fewer
is
children over the
we-
last 2 decades.
I'm
So
a
we have a
veteran,
birth
and
rate
I
problem. We
think
have a
it's ridiculous that people come back from
problem.
overseas and don't
And
have a
so
job.
we at Sherman
I
are
remember
very
I
careful
was
not to
getting
get
out
into
at the, right after, I didn't go to Vietnam, but I served during the Vietnam era, and when Vietnam ended, it was impossible to get a job in this country. And so all my friends here now couldn't find a job.
The political issues of immigration.
So
now,
we
that's to
started
say
ranking, we started
need these
getting
8 or 9
monthly
or 10
reports on
million
that.
jobs.
And it
to
took
be
about a
filled.
year. We did a
And
variety of
it is
programs. We
just
did a lot of
nonsensical
workforce
that we would, in many
meetings and things like
instances,
that. It took
have
about a year,
people
but
who
actually
we've
our
allowed to
unemployment
come to the
was
U.S.
lower
We've
for our
educated
veterans than
them
it
in our
was for non-veterans.
schools,
It
and
was
then
way
we
higher
send
for
them
veterans when I
back, and
started.
we
I think it was
open
almost
jobs for
15%
them
or
to
something
fill.
like that when I
So
started.
again, staying away from the political
Unemployment for the state
parts
was
of
over
it,
10.
the reality is
And then what we
employers
started
are saying,
doing is
we need
when I
this
became governor,
talent.
all they
We
wanted to
don't
do
have
is
the
say, oh, if
luxury
you don't go
of
to
saying,
college,
great,
you know,
we're going to have a
man,
bias against
you know,
people who are not
you must,
born
you know, must not
trained
be
here
very
in the
smart.
US.
You're not
In
going to
fact,
have any
we need all the
opportunity, which is
talent. So
complete BS.
Sherman's quite supportive
Most of
of
my
this
family
immigration,
didn't go
but
to
how we
college.
get to
I'm the
that
exception
is
of
a
my
different
brothers and
issue. We
sisters,
need
my
to
nieces and
ensure
nephews,
that
and
we
they're never
protect our
unemployed.
border and our
They always have
homeland,
a
and we
job.
need to know who is our country, is our
The other thing we
enemy.
did is we
At
waived a
that
whole bunch of
point,
things for our
getting them
veterans.
to the talent, matching them up with
So let me, here's my first questions. So we have all these rules for schools, and we have state schools, we have not-for-profits,
organizations
we
is something that
have
we all are pushing
for-profits, we have all
and
this
frankly
stuff.
demanding at this point.
Should there be
with
different
3.7%
standards for everybody? I mean, when you
unemployment.
guys
Dr.
hire
Johnson,
somebody, you
Lockwood.
say, man,
So,
I think
Senator Kane, I see your
there
two
ought to be a
proposals
different
as very
standard
tightly
for how
connected.
they get
My
federal money
understanding
or
is that
Pell
the
Grants or any of this
current
stuff
Pell
should
Grant
be-
system had its
should be
origins in
treated
the
differently just because
1958
of
National
their,
Defense Education Act,
how they're
which was
organized.
itself a response to Sputnik,
Anybody have
and a
a view on
realization by
that?
Congress that we needed more engineers and scientists. So there was a big
give
push
you-
at the
give you an
higher end
example.
of education,
If you're
of
a
math and
university,
science, but
you
not
have
so
no
much
obligation
in this
to help people get a
the
job.
middle skill area that
I
we're
changed
talking
the
about.
formula
So
in
that's
Florida,
that's a gap
and
we've
we became
had
number one
for a
higher
long
education
time.
because I
And
said,
I
remember, I'm a
think
kid
your
that
idea is
had no
absolutely
money,
brilliant
went to
and
school,
spot on.
went to junior
But then when it
college,
comes
was
to
only $200
immigration, I
a
think the question
semester.
is,
The university was expensive,
are we
$255.
providing
And
sufficient
they said,
opportunities to all
we're
the
gonna give
people
our
born in the
universities
United
money based
States,
on three
including in
things.
that middle area?
You get a job,
And if we are,
how much
and
money
they're
you
not
make,
taking-
what's it cost to get a degree? So actually, people got degrees, and we kept tuition low. So by the time I left, we were number one in higher education. Now, University of Florida, according to a lot of studies like Wall Street Journal, is the number one public university in the country.
Taking them off, we
because
still have gaps.
paid
Then I think
for
the
our
case
result.
immigration on
So
a
what do you guys
work-based,
think about having
or skills
having the
basis,
same standards
immigration reform
for-
is very compelling.
we have standards
MIT,
for proprietary
I'm an
schools that
immigrant
they have
senator,
to
as
help
you may
people
have
get a
guessed,
job or they don't get
and I
money.
got a PhD
Same
from MIT, and
standards
there's
for,
many other people in
all
MIT
schools.
currently who would love to spend their careers
Senator, I
building
work for
the
an
economy
engineering
and
school
strengthening the
that spends
national
a lot of time
security of the
trying to
United
get
States.
graduates,
And many of them will be able to
jobs.
come in
And I
because
fully
we
agree
have
that's a very important
not
emphasis.
easy,
I also
but various
point to
points of
Orlando.
entry if you
It's
have
emphasized in our book
master's
as one of the
degree or
leading
higher
examples
in
of
the United States.
public-private
But we don't do that for
partnerships,
skilled labor
generating
because in
skills
part of the
related to the
insecurity
defense
and
industrial
concerns
base and
about
also generating a huge amount
opportunities
of
for
jobs.
Native-born Americans.
Do I
in
think
part
that
of the
one
labor force.
size,
But I think
we
both
should
your
have one
ideas
size
together,
fits all
Senator,
for
I would make a
even
package,
higher
because I think
education, even
that
the university
is
sector?
a
I
compelling,
think some diversity and competition is good. I think MIT does very well
joint
in
and
that
twofold
competition.
attack
I think
on it.
encouraging others to do exactly
Dr.
what
Lockwood,
you're
I'm over
saying
time,
is
but
a
you
good
could be
idea.
as succinct
Would I
as Mr.
require
Taylor
it?
was earlier.
I think in this country, such requirements are hard to make work and often get a backlash. But I think where you're pushing, Senator, that education of all kinds should be linked to finding jobs and keeping people in jobs and measuring outcomes
when
and
he
making that data
closed over
available to
time.
everyone, I think that's tremendously important, Senator.
We absolutely need to invest in skills-based
So,
education, and
the
we
other thing
need
I did
to
was, if you came down,
stop
if you were-
enshrining the
if you were
four-year
Kurt
degree
Harris and
as
you were
the
gonna
only
expand, or let's say
valuable
Northrop
and
Grumman,
worthwhile thing that
they
a
said
young
they're gonna
person
add-
can
they
do.
were-
We've
they were moving stealth bombers,
overinvested
so I
in
tried to get them to do
bachelor's
more for
degree
Florida. So they
education
said, "We're gonna
and
need X number of
underinvested
jobs."
in core skills training.
So we
that's
guaranteed,
something Congress
I
should do now.
guaranteed because I paid for it.
I'll just
out of the
also
state
note
budget,
that
I said, we're going to graduate these people's in
our
with these degrees.
immigrant base
And some of them
is
were
wildly
universities, some were
productive in
technical schools
terms
and
of
stuff like that.
new
So
business
do
starts
you think that
and
that's what we
general
ought to be doing with our
entrepreneurship,
education
and
dollars?
skills-based immigration is
I
definitely
think
something
workforce
that has
planning,
been
Senator, of
an
exactly the
incredible
kind
net
you're talking about
benefit
is
to
very
the
good.
American
I think we
economy,
need
and
to
it
be
ought to
careful about
continue.
over-subsidizing the private sector for things things they would
Thank you,
otherwise have
Senator
done.
Keynes.
But if it's a net increase to the defense industrial base and on a federal-state partnership basis, I absolutely agree that making sure people have the skills and are incentivized to stay in Florida, which is also what has obviously happened, I think that's really important for the development of the defense industrial base.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator
I'd
Scott.
also like to
Senator Ronald, please.
add on to
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Keynes',
Chairman. We know
thoughts
that
on,
there is a workforce
Pell Grants,
shortage in just about
government
every
grants,
business, every
loans.
industry,
I spent 40
from
years
restaurants
in
to the
education
defense
business.
industry.
It's
This is
out of
for
control.
Mr. Taylor. The
We need to
DoD
use
has
it for the right
established the
reasons. It needs to
Defense
be redrawn.
Civilian
I've seen
Training
people
Corps
take
to
Pell
attract
Grants, go buy
top
cars
talent
with them, drop out of
into the
school
defense
immediately after they got
ecosystem
their Pell Grants.
and specifically
I've seen the same
relating
thing
to
with loans.
acquisitions. So how is this training
not
corps
enough
doing in
oversight on it.
terms of attracting the kind
But
of
we need
people
to
that
put
the
more
defense
emphasis
industry
on what
needs?
we're doing. And
Thank you for the
what
question.
he's calling
I
the
think
Jobs
Dr.
Act.
Lockwood would be
And we
more
get more
familiar
out
with
of
that
it
particular
if we would
DTC
just
program.
concentrate on it and put some authority behind it.
Thank you.
and
I'll
let people
note
know
that
you've
there
gotta
are
do it the right
actually
way. And I'm
currently
all for it.
several STEM employment workforce coordination programs going on in the Department of Defense, and certainly that one's among them. I believe that these programs would be far
training.
more effective if there was a
Because I've seen
greater
a lot of these
degree
kids
of
that go to
coordination
four-year
among them.
universities and waste their time
For
and get
example,
degrees that they
sharing
can't get
of
jobs
hiring
when they get out.
objectives
Their
and
job's gotta be at
even
Walmart or
even
somewhere
of
else like that,
candidates.
and it's not that
Likewise,
Walmart's
to
a bad
the
job. It's
to the
just
other senator's
if you
point
spend 4
earlier,
years of your money or
providing
government's
metrics
money
for such
going to school,
programs
you need to have some kind of
would be
opportunity to
would be
achieve
very
something
important.
Well,
more
why isn't
successful.
there
You know, I come from
coordination? Why
Alabama,
aren't there
and
metrics
we
to
have
measure
a
the effectiveness of
industrial
these
base
programs?
of
Whose
about
responsibility
50
is it
billion
to
annually,
ensure those
300,000
aspects are
jobs that
addressed?
work in our
Thank you for the
military
question.
industrial base.
As to
We have
the
Alabama shipyard in Austell,
particular
USA, we build
statutory
ships,
authority,
submarines,
I'll take
you
that
name
for the
it.
record. I
It's-
will
it's an
note
amazing
that
place. I enjoy going into these buildings and watching these people
a
work.
mandate to
What's amazing to me is
coordinate
the
among
stories I
programs
get.
to share best practices, to ensure that these programs are appropriately targeted to market and are adequately innovating would be very effective, and I believe that's something that
or
the Congress and the
From
Senate
some
in
of these
particular
major
can draw greater
corporations,
attention
it's
to.
not, they take their own initiative. They're going to
Okay,
fast
you can
food
help us,
places
my staff,
and
to
recruiting.
better focus on
watching
some of
people
those
work.
kinds of changes if we need to change.
And one
Mr. Taylor, I was particularly
shipbuilder
gratified
told
that
me
you
that
mentioned
their
that
best
if we want
welders
people to
have
have
come
STEM
from fast food work
experiences in
because they're
education,
willing to
that
work.
it's really
Dr.
something that
Lockwood,
we
be
should look
careful.
at from
You're telling
pre-K
people get up off the
to
couch and
12,
go to work.
and that
You don't need to say that around
we
here.
also should pay attention
But
to
they
diversity.
do. We have got to
So,
get people back to
yes,
work.
Senator Rosen has a
Dr.
bill
Johnson,
that would
you brought up a
encourage,
few
I
minutes
think,
ago
more
that we our
emphasis on these kinds of
workforce
programs.
has
I
dropped
have
since
a
World War
bill
II.
that
Well,
would
we all know
focus
that. I
on
mean, that's the
women
problem.
and minorities
What's the
and
cause
STEM
and what's the solution to
education.
that? I mean, we got to have.
ideas do
What's
you
the cause
have,
first?
that
We all know
would,
we have to have the.
focus us on the need for paying attention to K-12 and onward if we want more people to be STEM educated.
The cause of that.
Thank you for that question. I had
Since
the
World
good
War II.
fortune of
And the
once
solution,
running
is
what
it
was called the
NAFTA
Thurgood
that
Marshall
we send our
College Fund, which
manufacturing
represents
overseas?
the country's
Because
publicly
China has 5 to
supported
1
historically black
manufacturing
colleges
plants
and
compared to us
universities,
here in the United
47
States.
of them. In fact, Mr.
Is that
Gates
part
here
of
was
it?
my colleague. We specifically
Well, Senator, when I
created
think of
a
Alabama, I think of
program where we
Huntsville
went
and the
into
remarkable
3
success there of the
markets
rocket program,
that
which
were
was
largely
basically built from scratch in a place that had tremendous,
historically
no doubt, potential, but had not
people,
previously
and we
established
took
itself in that area
kids
of
who were
technology.
between
And we
the
used to do that a
ages of,
lot,
and I'm gonna get
Senator.
the
That was a
numbers
big
right,
lesson
9
out of World War II. We used to do it all around the
13
country, and the
with a
private sector did it,
focus
as well as the
on
public sector.
taking those
But
kids
unfortunately,
and
what's happened
after-school
due to
programs
market
that were
forces,
STEM
and so I'm not blaming any
oriented,
particular individual,
to
is we've
expose
shifted
those
much more of that
children and
innovative
their
activity
families
towards the East Coast and the West
and
Coast.
to STEM
These are cities that
careers,
don't like to
but
build more
more
housing.
importantly,
The price of housing is very high.
taking
It's hard to
certain
move there.
types
A lot of the
curriculum early on, so that by the time, if you wanted to go to college to be an engineer, there are things you needed to do in high school, courses you had to take, et cetera. So we mapped them. We gave them, oftentimes their families did not have, they didn't have
expertise
parents who were
in
college
the middle
graduates, or if they were
skills
college
part of
graduates, they
manufacturing,
weren't
for example, in the
STEM college
Midwest of
graduates.
the United
We
States,
literally took those kids and
is
we
stranded
followed them
there because the
through
opportunities are
10th
other places,
grade,
but they can't afford to
preparing them
move
up
because
to
of
and
the
including
housing
taking
market,
the SAT,
and we're not making a
ACT,
best
et
use
cetera.
of our talent. So I
those
think
sorts
more
of
investments
programs
in
helped
more
us yield a
communities, including
significantly higher
Alabama, which
number
features
of
very highly in
future
our
STEM
book, by the
workers
way.
from those
That's the
communities
right
than would
geographic
have
approach
without
in
it.
general
So
to
you're
bolstering
saying
science and
that we
technology.
have to be
And when it
very
comes to national
intentional
defense,
about
Senator, I
how
think it
we're
lines
going
up
about it,
even
and that
better.
you have some
Because we want
longitudinal
to
data
build
that shows that
communities
when you are
with
this
these
focused,
skills.
that you
People don't
will
move
have
that much.
people
Great.
going into
So
the
those
STEM
skills
areas
will
because,
stay
for
in this
example,
community that's focused on
women
producing
and
submarines
minority people
or
drop
rockets or
out of
whatever that
the
community is.
STEM
That's going to be a very strong
pipeline
local regional
at
defense
every
base. So
step of
we'll
the
use a
way
little bit of
because
our
especially for women, for example, there
disadvantages
are not
in
very
our
many
favor
models
in this case.
for
And I think we'll
women
get a better.
in STEM. And in terms of workforce training, we are building a dry dock at Pearl Harbor Shipyard. It is the biggest infrastructure project that the DoD is engaged in. It is $3.5 billion.
Yeah, I think still in our country, we
I
still
hope
have
that
a
it
lot
will
of
come in
patriotism
at
out there.
that
Sometimes we don't see
price.
that,
But
people wanna
they
work
had a hard
for our
time
military, and
training workers
And,
for this project.
and they
Some
make-
2,000
they make very
plus
good money. I
workers
mean,
will be
but you
needed
gotta pay a price,
to
you gotta
build this dry
sacrifice.
dock
And we
over
can't-
the
we
next 2
can't
years or so.
overlook our
And
education
in the
in this
meantime,
country.
we
Our
have an
education's going
apprenticeship
south.
program
I
for
hear
the
from
Pearl
somebody
Harbor
that's been
Naval
in high
Shipyard,
schools
one of
all over
4
this country,
public
my former job.
shipyards that we have.
The things that
They
we're
had
teaching
2,500
are not
applicants
in-
for
conducive
152
to
positions.
push these
So
young men and
obviously, there are a
women
lot of
and
people
make
who
them
want
better
to
for
get
themselves.
this kind of training
they
so they
just
can
say,
be
if
in
I
the
get a
pipeline
degree,
to work
or if I get
in
a
our
diploma in high
shipyards, but
school,
we're
that's
not
good
creating
enough.
enough
And that's really
spaces
not good enough.
for
They've
them.
gotta
Do
be
any of you have any
incentivized on how
ideas
to
what
do
we
it.
can
Not-
do
Mr. Taylor was
to
talking earlier about
accommodate
that,
these
and we got to
young
incentivize.
people who want to be trained in our workforce? Anyone?
Yes. It's already been mentioned by a few of my colleagues here,
again, it all
but
goes back to our
school
military
to
industry.
work training
As you said,
pipelines
Huntsville,
and
it is
close
growing. I
public-private
just bought a new house
partnerships
up there and
with
watched it go
educational
up,
institutions
There wasn't,
are
in the
very
entire time
effective
that
at
that house was
establishing
built,
firm pipelines for
there wasn't
workers.
one
We've
white
demonstrated
American,
this many times in the
one
private
black
sector,
American,
particularly in the
or one
auto
Asian
industry,
American that worked on that house.
in some of the states represented
It
here.
was people from other countries.
Reinforcing
Okay?
the
I
training
don't
at
know whether
community
they were legal or not.
colleges
They
and
said they
trade
were.
schools
And I
and
asked them, I
linking
said, make sure there's
those
not-
skilled
I'll
professions
have to get
directly
Senator, make
into
sure
where the
there's
jobs are
people
needed.
that are Americans that are working on this house.
Senator,
We can't build
apprenticeships
anything.
powered by
We can't
AI.
build
I
anything
think
unless
that's
we have
where the future is, and that's what the
immigration
private
in this
sector is
country.
not
I
going to
truly
do enough
believe that. I
without
truly
your
believe that, but we got to
prompting.
do it the right way. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Thank you very much, Senator Ronald. Senator Mullen,
Well,
please.
thank you, Chairman Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank
for
you for the
holding this
witnesses that
hearing.
are here. I just find it the irony of us talking about what we need to do to get a workforce going, and from a guy that's owned multiple trade
I'd
companies.
also like to thank each of the witnesses, of course, for testifying.
I mean, we
today.
incentivize in Congress, we
And,
incentivize
I
people to
worked
stay
my
home.
former
They can
career
work the
in STEM,
system.
and so I'm
I
going
mean,
to
here
talk a
we're
little bit about the
legalizing-
STEM workforce
We're
shortage.
legalizing drugs,
And as mentioned in the
marijuana
National
for medical
Defense
purposes,
Industrial
and we're
Strategy, we have
incentivizing
to
kids
find
to get a
creative
medical card
solutions
to
upskill
smoke
our
marijuana in
manufacturing
high school at
workforce
18 years
so
old,
that
and they
we
can't pass a
can
drug
meet our
test to get
nation's
hired by
strategic
DOD to begin
production,
with.
targets
I mean, we
and
do
our
it
goals.
to ourselves
And so,
here in
Mr.
Congress.
Taylor, can
If
you
we want to
speak to
really
the
get our
labor
workforce
shortages
going,
in
then we
STEM
need to
fields,
incentivize people
the
to work,
impact
not
on our
have an
defense
excuse to stay
industrial
home.
base, and if there's specific
And we have a
sectors,
program that gives people a
impacted
helping
by the
hand.
skilled
We won't give them a
workforce
helping hand to
shortage,
push them into the
more than
workforce either.
others.
We'd like to get a helping
as you
hand
can
and stay on a
imagine. Thank you,
platform.
Senator
And
Rosen.
then you disincentivize them to be
one
able
of
to
the
step
problems
up.
is
I've had
we wait too long to
hundreds
talk
of
about what the
employees
talent
that
problem
refuse a
is. We
raise
say-
over the years that I have been self-employed because they can't afford to take the raise, because if they take this raise to $18 an hour, they lose these benefits. And if you can't take a raise to $18 an hour and do that job, you're never going to be able to get the job that can do $30 an hour. Because the ladder stops at that point. It's our fault. And so if we in Congress want to get serious about the workforce, then we need to figure out how we incentivize people to get into the workforce. That means we need to push them into the workforce,
For example,
not
of the types of
allow them to become
Americans who
dependents
come
of the
through the
state.
systems, K through 12
And that's
educations,
exactly
we
what we
know
have. We have 3 generations
disproportionately
now of people that are
underperforming
dependent on the
communities,
state. But that's me
underrepresented
ranting.
minorities,
I'll
and then
stop.
you wake up and say, well, we
And
don't
I
have
will,
enough
I will,
diverse
I will
talent
move
in
on
STEM.
to actually my
Well, it's
questions.
because that started
Dr.
13,
Lockwood,
14 years ago.
I would
It
like
didn't
to
start
start with you.
immediately. And so employers
As the
are
largest maintenance,
committed to
repair,
the
and overhaul
idea
facility in the
of
world, which is at
increasing
Tinker Air
and
Force
solving
Base,
for their STEM
we have a huge
shortages,
number
but
of
we know
civilian
when we say at SHRM,
employees,
it's the two
around
E's. It's
16,000.
education and
Most of these
employers. We've got to
employees are
start a
wage
lot-
grade maintainers, and many have decades of experience. We have received reports from reports that the DLA, which is the Defense Logistic Agency, is increasingly
earlier in the
relying on
process.
contractors
The other
to do
thing
these
that
kinds
the
of
senator
jobs
just
at other
spoke to
sites.
is
Are
that
you familiar with
increasingly
this?
companies are going straight to high schools and
Yes.
saying, in fact,
Okay,
some new
with
instances
a
of going to
follow-up
middle
question on
schools
that,
and saying,
then,
I'm going to
when
identify
using
your
contractors
kids
instead
now,
of government
ensure
employees,
that they
what are the vetting
obtaining the
requirements
skills that we
for
need
bringing,
to the STEM
for
skills,
bringing them in
the
on our
basic
basis?
maths, the sciences, et cetera, and we essentially are going
It's
to
my
pull them
understanding
through
that,
and
like
mentor them
other
so that we
workers
have
on military
potentially
facilities,
employable
that
people
they must
10,
pass
12 years later, as
a
opposed to
background
hoping that the
investigation.
K through 12 system will provide the pipeline.
Are we concerned?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because my
about
very first
moving
bill is
that
called
direction
Building
with
Blocks of
contractors
STEM, and it
instead of
does
having
exactly
actual
that and allows to build
our
that
own
STEM
contractors,
pipeline,
our
K
own
through
employees
12,
working for the
schools
Department of
all
Defense in
across
the civilian
America to
capacity?
invest in STEM
Relying
education.
more on that?
And
I will note that the use of contractors in general is very costly to the department. In many cases, the department is paying a heavy premium
Right.
for the use of contractors. So rather than
I've seen the
necessarily
greatest
take the
programs in
expedient route
kindergarten and
of
elementary school.
simply
They
contracting out
kind of
for
use
that
little
additional labor
robotics
support, I would
and,
encourage
fun
instead the
things.
department
The kids don't even realize
to
they're
correctly
learning
align
STEM, but
incentives
they're
for the
learning
management of
all
its own civilian
these,
personnel.
great things
Is
of
it-
logic.
is it-
So
I mean,
thank you
because we
for
are
bringing
paying
that up,
a
and I was glad
much
to have a bill
higher
passed to do
price
that.
to have
I'm
outside
going to move on to Dr. Johnson. As DOD, we're going
and so
to
if we can pay
focus
that
on
wage for
partnering
outside
with the private
contractors,
sector. We know that's really
what
important
is it
to
that's
increase our
keeping
workforce
our
preparedness.
government, us, from
preparedness.
upping the wages of individuals? Because
How can the
we have-
department
we have,
expand its outreach
we're literally
to
losing employee
encourage
contractors
more
at Tinker
of the private sector
because they're
in
getting
the
picked
advanced
off
manufacturing
by
process?
outside industries that's give them a
Well, I think that's a
$10,000
great
sign-on
question,
bonus.
Senator.
then
And I
we're
think
turning back around
focusing
and hiring
on
them as
hubs,
contractors to
areas,
come back in and
geographies
work
where
on
the
the
private
base
sector has
for
the potential,
an
where you
exuberant amount more.
You are absolutely correct.
So what do we need to do to change that here in Congress?
Right. I'll note that currently the Department of Defense does not have the salary flexibilities that it needs in order to pay workers a going wage.
Initiative.
It is
And
bound
thinking about where
to
housing
the
can also
federal
be built,
wage schedule,
Senator Rose, and I think too often
which has been
there's great
superseded several
opportunities in
times
places
by
where the communities don't
statute,
want to build housing, so the
creating
housing
great
just becomes super
distortions
expensive.
in
Then
that
you either have to pay
wage
a very high wage
that's
or
actually
nobody's gonna
offered
move
to
there.
workers on the
So
ground.
I think looking for those geographic
Furthermore,
partnerships
the
is something that has not
structures that surround
previously been
civilian
sufficiently
hiring are
emphasized.
cumbersome,
Well, this
and
is
it's
for
very
defense, but
difficult
we're becoming a new tech
for,
hub in Reno, and this is the kind of thing that
civilian
we're talking
employees
about
of the
happening,
department, civilian
in
managers to
Nevada.
actually
But I'm going to
manage
move
that
on to
workforce
Dr. Lockwood
effectively.
quickly because I want to talk
dealing
about the
with,
impact of budget delays.
Contractors is
I know
far simpler.
the
If you need to
impact,
dismiss
failure
someone
to
for
pass a full-year
underperformance, you can
funding
do that
deal,
immediately.
including for the
You don't need to
DoD.
justify it.
It
You don't need to go
constrains our
through a year's
long-term
worth of
strategic
write-ups
plans.
and
It has negative
large paper
impacts for
trail,
all of our prime
and your
contractors.
job will not be in any way threatened by spurious complaints to the Inspector General. So as a result of this, the use of contractors is very expedient, but incredibly costly to the taxpayer.
But
Our
I agree with that. We
subcontractors,
also
they
need
can't
to talk
prepare
about
and
direct
plan,
hiring,
and when
which
you
we've done
can't
this in
plan,
the
you
Cal's
can't
Ammunition
have the
plant, which
workforce. And
Mr.
if you
Taylor, I was
lose
gonna
the
ask you about
talent
that,
workforce and they go
because
somewhere else for a
onboarding
job,
also takes forever to
they
bring them
may
on. People aren't going to wait
not come back,
6
and it
months
takes a long
for a
time to
job
build a qualified
onboard on,
welder for
going
a
through
submarine
the
and all of
process.
those
Direct
kinds
hiring
of
is
things.
important.
So if we're
But
going to
going
build
back to
those
this, and I'll
resilient
wrap it up
supply
real quick,
chains
Mr.
for our
Chairman.
defense industrial base,
If
Congress
we're
must
not
pass
saving
regular
us
appropriations in a timely
$1
manner. So,
by
Dr.
keeping our
Lockwood,
wages
can you
down,
talk to us about the federal, the
it's
impact of the
costing us,
federal
'cause
funding,
all
the
we're doing is gaming
uncertainty
the system
all
by
across our
going out and
defense industrial
hiring
base, what that
contractors who
really
come in and do
means
the
for our
same
safety and
job
security
because
across
it's faster,
the
but
world.
actually it's because we
Absolutely.
need the workforce.
I do view uncertainty
we,
in the timing
here
of
in
federal
Congress,
budgets
really
to
need to
have a
start
very
looking at the
negative impact
wages
on our
that we're
total readiness
paying and get
posture.
on scale to
In
what it is
addition,
today. I mean, look at how much wages have increased in the last 4 years. I mean, it is astronomically, right? And we haven't actually adjusted our pay wage at a
I would say that
serious
further
look to
dampens
keep up with
interest
inflation,
in federal
especially with inflation
employment
being at
by
17%.
creating the
We haven't been able to
perception
actually
of turmoil
adjust that
and an unnecessary
in over
politicalization
2
of these
decades
critical roles that
That's
we
absolutely
need
correct.
filled. The federal
I'll
wage
also
system
add
is
that particularly for
an
young
antiquated
people
relic of
who
the
are just
70s,
entering their careers,
where
extremely long
we set
delays
wages
in time to hire
specific bins
often
binding
become
occupations
untenable.
together that
They
no
have
longer
loans
bear any
looming.
relation to one
They
another.
need to start work immediately.
Furthermore,
They can't
we
afford to
apply
wait
this antiquated
6, 12
methodology
months
to an
to be certain of having a
unrepresentative
job.
set
So
of
this is
data
something we can
that
address.
is currently
Thank you, Mr.
collected by the
Chairman. I yield
Department of
back.
Defense,
Thank
completely
you very
redundant
much,
in my
Senator Rose.
personal
Senator
opinion,
Sullivan.
Thank you,
to
Mr. Chairman,
that already
and I
collected
appreciate
by the
the
Bureau of Labor Statistics,
witnesses
which
today on a
conducts
really,
a much
really
larger and
important
comprehensive
topic.
survey of all American professions.
By the way, I agree
Thank you,
100% with
Mr. Chairman,
Senator.
sorry about going over time.
Thank you very much, Senator Mullen. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for being here today. I think most of us would agree that the federal wage
Kane
system
on his
is
Jobs
broken.
Act, I think it's something,
It gets
and
hung
Senator
up on
Tuberville on what we
political
need to do, but I think
ideology
it's a really good
differences and
opportunity.
trying to fix it, and that's the
We
problem.
should keep moving forward on
But
that.
I don't know, I think maybe
As
it
you
was
know, when
Mr.
we're
Taylor
looking at
who
our
said that
strategic
we
competition,
have,
one of the things that the
my recollection was
dictators
9
in
million job
Beijing,
openings,
Xi
but only
Jinping and
6.5
others are
million
really
workers.
scared about is our
Isn't
submarine force.
One of the challenges
It's
that
an
we're facing,
asymmetric
the
advantage
demographics
that
of this country,
is still
that
very
we are not
significant, and
producing
they're terrified
because of
by
our
it,
birth
which
rate.
is why
We don't
should be
have the number of people that we need
building
to
a
fill
lot
the
more
jobs that are being created.
submarines. I met with the
Undoubtedly,
CNO of the Navy yesterday
we have a
and just
birth rate
talked
problem
about
and have had so for
how
the
there's
last
so
2
much
decades.
bipartisan
What
interest
comes
here
as
in
a
the
surprise to
Congress
people is you're talking about a
to,
post-COVID impact. During 2020 and 2021,
increase
the
our
birth rate dropped 4%. We saw a significant, so it was already on its way down, and then it dropped, and for good reason. No one wanted to go to a hospital during that period of time.
And on top of that, we've had the most restrictive
capacity to build
immigration,
ships
legal
and
immigration
subs.
rates.
Legal.
In my lifetime,
My staff
in the
had
last
done some
6 years
research
or
for
so.
me.
So
We have the
that
capacity,
also
we've done it
exacerbates
before.
problem. If
A
we
lot
could
of
fix our
people don't
broken
know
immigration
our
system,
country had
we
a
would do
two-year
much
head
better in
start
terms of having the workforce
before
that we
Pearl
need.
Harbor on increasing our ship
But
capacity.
can you, one of the
So in
things, I
19
understand Senator Warren talked about how we were able to outproduce our adversaries during World War II. And one of the
1937, we
ways
had
was by getting
335
women into the workforce.
ships in our fleet.
How can the
By
defense
Pearl
industrial
Harbor,
base better leverage women's
19
participation?
December 7th, 1941, we
I
had
don't know who
790.
might like to answer that.
Okay, so we doubled the
Well,
size.
the discussion with
Before
Senator
we got
Warren,
into a
which I think
war.
is exactly on this target.
And it's a
Senator
dangerous
Jean,
time
was
right
about
now.
childcare and women not being able
Very
to participate in
analogous
the
to the
workforce
both keeping the numbers down, but also meaning that for at a important developmental part of their career, they're not in the workforce, they're not acquiring the skills, and therefore they can't move up later, including to supervisory positions. So you're missing people in a static sense, but also in a
lot
dynamic
of what
sense.
happened was Congress
Childcare is
acted
clearly an issue. It's something that
for
I appreciate
laws in
having
particular,
had
the
3
Vision
children
Trammell
and
Act, the
having a
Second Vision
challenge with
Trammell Act, the
childcare
Naval
for the 30
Expansion
years
Act
that
of
they were at home.
1940, and the
But
two
I
Ocean
think we've got a
Navy
bigger
Act
problem in
of
that
1940.
as I've visited schools,
So I want to
that
start with you,
young girls
Dr.
are
Lockwood.
not
What are the big ideas?
as engaged
Big
in
ideas.
the STEM subjects
We've done this
as young
before,
boys are. And
right?
so for
We don't want to
robotics
start building our
competitions, for
industrial base
example,
out once the
girls are
bullets
much,
start flying.
less likely to
The time to
participate
do it is
than
now.
young boys. Are there
And
ways
we've done
that
this
we can
before. We have the
encourage,
capacity to do it as a nation
girls
before.
to think about those subjects
What are the big
that
ideas
we're
that
not
you think
already
we
doing?
need, particularly as it relates to subs?
Lockwood.
Thank you
Yes,
for the
Ms.
question. I have a young daughter at home, and she told me when she was 3 that when she wanted to grow up, when she grows up, she wants to be a doctor and a mommy and a scientist, and I want that to be possible for her, so I determined I certainly was not going to quit.
We need over 100,000
To double down on the
new
childcare
trained
issue,
workers.
I do
But
believe
I
this
think
is
the
a
bipartisan
critical
nature
thing,
of
but
what is
to
needed.
your point, it's really
we would be
important that the
open to
child can
even a new
envision
shipyard.
herself doing
What
the
are the
job.
big ideas? I want to hear from you very briefly.
Children are not
and
going
then
to study,
the
and they're not
others,
going to
if
invest
you
in
can
things that they think are
actually
for other people.
respond
And
in
so
a
the
request for the
broader we
record,
can
and
make
then
opportunities to
Dr.
engage
Johnson,
in
I have a quick
after-school
question for you
activities, to
on-
put the
on what's happening in
robot, to
Silicon
put the
Valley. But
drone remote in
Dr.
the hands
Lockwood, the
of all
biggest
the children
thought
is a good
piece that
thing.
you
I'll
can
also note
do.
that among the developed
Here. Thank you.
economies, the United
Let me
States have
quickly
among the
say that
shortest school day. The submarine force is
This
near and dear
creates
to
an
my heart
incredible
as the wife
burden
of a currently
for all
serving
working
commander of a
families.
fast attack boat
There are,
deployed in Guam. In many areas, good before and after
You
care
don't have to
programs.
explain that to me.
Okay.
I understand that
Yeah.
problem. To follow on Senator Rono's question about the submarine
Asheville?
industrial base.
Well, Xi
Excuse
Jinping
me.
is scared
Over
to
the
death
next
of
10
what
years,
your
the
husband
submarine
has
industrial
Indeed,
base is going to need to hire
I believe
nearly
that to be
100,000
fact.
We need a lot
workers
more of them.
at both
Yes.
primary construction yards.
I do believe the analysis I've seen has indicated there's simply no way that this country can meet its own needs and
you talked
also
a little
support
bit
its
about
AUKUS commitments without an
ways that
additional
we can
shipyard.
encourage apprenticeships.
Our
So you agree
capacity
with the
ways,
idea of additional shipyard?
I do.
A public
encourage,
shipyard?
I think we need
workers
all
to
available
join,
options, sir.
In the submarine industry. Are there ways that
I would be open to
suppliers
performing
can
additional
also improve
analysis
the
to
labor
try and
environment
determine
for skilled
exactly what
workers?
format would be most
Well, I think it's
effective.
going to take all
But I'll
of
note
them.
that
That's
in World
really
War
interesting.
II,
This is about a human
tanks
capital
rolled off the
strategy.
floor
We can decide that
of the
we're
Ford
going to
plant.
open a number of
And
shipyards
they're
or whatever we
damn
do,
proud of it, and
but
they should.
ultimately, your point, well-crafted HR strategy where you say we need 100,000 people at this period of time means we will get some percentage of people from this sector, the supplier community, the government, et cetera. This requires a
Good. Well, if you can get
comprehensive
back to us
strategic
with more
overview and
details on
plan.
that
And what we've
idea
seen
and other
is
big
there are no
think
shortage
ideas
of
on this,
programs
the way
within
the
federal
Congress
government,
acted
but they're
prior
not
to World War II.
orchestrated and they're not
Very
specifically
impressive.
identified, time-limited, budget-limited,
Dr. Johnson, real
et
quick,
cetera,
I
to get
agree
the
with Senator
results. In the
Tuberville
private
that
sector,
there's still
if I said I
very
was
much
going to need
patriotism in
100,000
our
employees,
country that
as
wants
has
to
often
help.
been in the
One of the
companies where I've been
ironic
Fortune,
areas that I've kept a
Fortune 500
close eye on
company,
over the last
CHRO,
several years is
you
the
are
return of
told 5
patriotism
years
in
from now,
Silicon
we're
Valley.
going to need this many of these
10 years ago,
types
they
of
didn't have
employees
it, right?
in these
You know,
geographical
they were much
locales.
more interested
And we
working
build
with
a
the goddamn
strategy
Chinese
around it. That
communists
is
than
HR at its best, and it can be done,
American
but very
military industrial
The Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which is one of
That's
those 4
changing.
public
It's a
shipyards,
great
which,
opportunity for us as
shares
a
the border
country.
between
It's a
New
strategic
Hampshire and
advantage
Maine,
the Chinese and Russians
has taken
don't.
an approach that integrates its workforce into decision-making, and that has really kept the workers there. It's really focused on working with management on good labor practices.
But
so I would agree.
the
that's a
Pentagon's
great way
culture
to,
in
better
rules
keep people in the workforce.
don't
Thank you,
allow
Mr.
it.
Chairman.
Don't allow us to take advantage of it. You've heard this phrase, the valley of death.
Thank the witnesses for
Right?
being
You
here
have
today.
a high-tech company's got great capacity.
Senator Kaine
can't
mentioned a
break
few
into the
moments
Pentagon
ago,
system.
expanding the Pell
and then
Grant for
the
short-term
company goes out
skills-based
of business
education. It's one
one of the
because
quickest
it takes
and
5
the
years
best
to
ways
get
to
the
combat these
Pentagon
labor
interested.
shortages
What
that we're
is your
talking about
thoughts
today
on
and the
what we
ones
can
we've seen around
do
the country.
to
I think that my proposal, the Pell
enhance the
Act, which the
ability
House is
of our
actually taking up
industrial
this week,
capacity
it's one of the
to
best
take advantage
ways to
of
approach
this new
expanding this program.
interest
So my bill
with some of
allows
our
a variety of
high-tech
educational
companies who want to
institutions
help
to
us,
participate in the grant
want to help
program
America be strong,
with guardrails
and
that
not
empower institutions to
fund the
produce
Chinese
high-demand
like so many of
workers
them
for
used to do, which was
high-paying
very
jobs. And that's exactly what we need to build up our defense industrial base. So Dr. Lockwood, the need for a strong pipeline, switching gears here to cyber, cyber workers, that need has grown
Pathetic and
exponentially,
un-American, in my view.
given the current threat environment that we're in.
Yes, so
So a two-part question. What
You're
can
spot
the
on with that
DoD
overall
learn
characterization.
from
I think you need some
private sector
carrots.
recruiting
It could be
and
prizes,
also
it could be
retaining
prestige,
cyber talent?
things that pull those tech
And
companies towards the problems that
simultaneously,
you
how can
want
the
them to
DoD
solve. Because
better
if you leave them
compete
to their own
against the private
devices,
sector
we know what
for
they're going
that
to do. It's
talent
more
pool?
social media, it's more digital ads.
Thank you for the question.
Helps national defense.
I think one of the key
So I
lessons of
think
the private
defining,
sector is that a
using
four-year degree
DARPA
is not
type
necessary.
approach and define this is the problem
We
to
need
be
to
solved,
enable
which could
our
be a
young
direct
people
military
to
problem, or it
become
could be
productive workers
healthcare
as
related
soon
to
as
military, it
possible.
could be
And
transitioning,
Dr. Johnson has
military
earlier
personnel to
mentioned
civilian. It could be,
AI-enabled training. I'll just
education,
offer
more
that
broadly.
DoD
There's a
already
lot
has
of
experience
really important goals that
with
matter a lot to you on
AI-enabled
this
training,
committee,
in particular in the
Silicon Valley
IT
pays
field,
zero, almost
where the
zero
Navy some
attention.
years ago
I will
piloted
also,
a
by the way,
program
Senator, send you
to
some
train
enhanced,
its shipboard computer technicians
reinforcement for your
using an
talking points on
AI-assisted digital tutor. This was an incredibly effective training methodology and quickly was brought to bear to skill up, in this case, an enlisted force, individuals entering without a college
the role of submarines
education,
in World War II, the role
and quickly make them
U.S. innovation on
wildly
naval aircraft
productive.
prior to World War II, which was absolutely huge. And the fact that this country was producing roughly
Not only were
one
they very
aircraft
quickly
carrier per
trained,
month
but
at
the
its peak in World War
quality
II,
of their
because we were able to
training
move
was
so much of our production
significantly superior to
when it
those
was needed,
who had
but
gone
not
through the
prematurely.
traditional
So you're right
schooling.
about the base that was built. Anyway, Senator, I'll follow up with
And
you
then,
directly.
sir, I'm sorry, could you remind me of your
Mr.
second
Chairman.
question?
How
Thank you,
could the
Senator
DoD better
Sullivan.
compete against the private sector
Senator
for that
Warren,
talent
please.
pool? Because they're going to be using some of these same
Thank
things
you,
that
Mr.
you're mentioning.
Chairman, and thank you
So
for
how can we
holding this
differentiate
hearing.
DoD?
Yes,
on
thank you. I think one thing that the department can
workforce
offer
dynamics.
that
The
the private
strong
sector
economic
cannot
recovery
is
under
purpose that is
President
driven
Biden
by something other
is
than a
a
profit
win for the
motivation.
United States. We have
To some extent,
14.8 million jobs created.
The department will not
fastest
always be able
growth
to compete
in
on
real
wages. It can
inflation-adjusted
compete on
wages of
purpose.
any recovery
I would
in
encourage
more
you
than half a
to
century. But there
develop
is
a
still
revolving
work to
door
do.
mindset to make it easy for workers to flow in and out of public service and private employment. Right now, it's more of a one-way exit than a revolving door. So making it easy to recapture that talent,
in our defense
to give
manufacturing
re-entering
workforce and
either
make sure
service
that we have
members
the
or civilian
workers
workers
that are needed to meet our
time
national security
to
needs.
recover their
One
career
tool
track within
that I'd like us to
the
talk
DoD
about for making
apparatus
sure
would
that the
be,
labor
I believe,
supply
very
keeps
effective.
up with the
Thank you.
labor demand
So,
is providing
every
the
high school or
quality,
college student with
affordable
a STEM major, they're
childcare
aware of all these
that workers
opportunities
need
with
so
Google,
they can
Amazon,
actually go
other
to
big
work.
tech
You know, we
firms. So
do this to
do you
some
think the
degree
Pentagon can
already,
improve its
including with the
advertising
DoD's
or
excellent
public
child care
education on
program.
severe,
But while we
on
could
civilian
invest
career
a whole
opportunities?
lot more
And
for our
what
military
recommendations, if
and
any,
our
would you have,
civilian families, over
that would allow us
half
to
of
further
Americans
increase the
right now
visibility of
live in
DoD
child care
opportunities?
deserts. That means
Thank you for the
children
question.
outnumber the child
During the
care
time of COVID,
slots
DoD
by
and
3 to
its,
1.
even its industrial partners' footprint in public schools was significantly curtailed, and it has not recovered. I think FaceTime is very important with our young people, and the public schools provide an important avenue for that.
And that means millions
critical
of
to,
families across
the
the
defense
country that
industrial
need
base
child
and the
care
DoD's civilian
and
workforce
either
is not
can't
only,
find it, or
hiring
if they
talent,
can
but
find it,
retaining
they
talent,
can't
as
afford
you
it.
know.
Professor Johnson,
Are you aware of any
you're an
barriers in
economist in
OPM's
MIT,
promotion
former
process
chief
which could inhibit
economist at the
retention within the
IMF.
DoD's
So
civilian
let's do
workforce,
some
Dr. Lockwood?
Econ 101 and drill down on the root
Yes,
of this
thank you for the
problem.
question. I will
How
note
does
that
insufficient
the
supply of
OPM
childcare
process for
affect labor
nearly all
supply,
personnel actions
including the
is
defense
quite
workforce?
bureaucratic.
The lack of adequate
and
childcare
it takes
obviously
very long
limits the
time.
ability of women
In
to
many cases,
participate
also,
in the workforce. And of course, many of those
position
aircraft carriers
descriptions
and
are
submarines that were
outdated
built in
and
World War
perhaps
II were
not
built by
well
women.
honed
So
for
not
the
enough
actual
child
work
care
that
means
needs to
not
be
enough
done,
workers
and
to
this
power
would
our economy
inhibit
in the defense
timely
industry and
promotion
basically everywhere
and
else.
advancement
But let's
if
go down
candidates
one
are being
more
screened by
level.
OPM against outmoded job descriptions.
One of the things that my colleagues have mentioned is the shipbuilding challenges, undersea submarine building challenges coming up.
Professor Johnson, help us understand
as the Navy works to
bottleneck
expand the
in
size of its
child
fleet,
care.
so what
If we
incentives
want to
particular to
increase
that,
the supply of child
would you
care,
suggest suggest for
What's
the
the key
Department
input that
of
we need
Defense
more
and the
of?
manufacturing
You need more
workforce,
people willing to work in the
in this
childcare
particular sector.
Okay, so we need more child care workers to help unlock this
We need
labor
to draw more
supply
workers
across the
into this
board.
field.
How can
So
we do
in
that?
terms of
Why
incentive
don't we just
programs,
pay
I think we need
childcare
to fix
workers
the
more
broken
money?
federal wage grade system.
Well, that is the best idea, and that is what would work. But
compensate
just to
for
emphasize
these
that these
high-demand
childcare
skills.
centers, for the most part, operate on
that
razor
there
thin
needs to be a
margins.
very
So there's not
visible
much else
public
to
campaign,
squeeze, and the money that's paid by parents
to advertise
goes to the
these
child care workers, but the
availabilities
parents can't
and
afford
to
to pay
really
the
put
child care
ourselves
workers
out there
enough
and
to
say
pull
this is
pull
critical
people
for
into
the
that
national
child care
defense
work.
and let's
so
all
the
get
market,
after it.
I'm afraid, Senator Warren, is failing us here.
Okay, so the market
Senator,
fails.
just very
the
quickly to that
DoD
point, we actually went to the civilian workforce and asked the question, this is broadly, only 46% of working American civilians have even considered the Department of Defense as employer. And when we asked them specifically
stepped
why,
up.
the primary
DoD
reason
child
that was
development
cited was
centers
a lack of
cap
knowledge
fees
about the
at
DoD's
7%
culture and their
of
employer
family
brand.
income,
So
and
in
then the
addition
federal
to
government
raising
picks up
salaries and
the rest
providing
of the
all
cost.
sorts of
It
benefits
is
and talking about
a worthwhile
we need to
investment
sell
in
that this
military
is an actual
readiness.
opportunity.
But
People just don't
DoD
think
has
of
not
it. They think about,
updated
go
its
to the
pay
military
scale for
or not.
child care workers for 30 years now.
Thank you, Senator.
And
Senator Kelly.
unsurprisingly, DoD is struggling
Thank you, Mr.
to
Chairman.
attract the
Thank you
workers
to our
it needs.
witnesses for being
Meanwhile,
here today.
federal investments
Dr.
in
Johnson,
civilian child care
I appreciated
fell off a
the
cliff
focus of your
last
testimony
year
on the
when
Chips and
pandemic
Science
funding
Act,
ended,
which I
and that
helped
exacerbated
negotiate.
child
And
care
particularly
shortages.
appreciated
So,
your
Professor
focus on the
Johnson, if the
science
federal
and
government
economic
stepped up
development
its investments
in the
child
science
care,
portion of that bill.
particularly to increase
As you noted,
child
while we were able to provide advanced appropriations for the Critical Chips Act programs, there are many other new programs created that are going to rely on an annual appropriations.
care worker
Now, I come from 15
What
years at the
impact
space
would that
program
have
where
on the
we
defense
see
workforce?
this
I think it would
firsthand. But
strengthen the defense
Dr.
workforce.
Johnson,
More women
can you
would be able to
expand
go
upon
to
your
work.
testimony
You'd also have more
and
opportunity for
explain
women
how
to build the
investments
skills that we've all been
in
talking about.
basic
We're emphasizing
science
across all
and
range of
innovation
skills earlier
can
in their
yield
careers, so instead of
economic
having
growth,
to take some years
even
out of the
if
labor
we
force, they would
can't
continue to be
always
engaged.
foresee
And that's
exactly
really
how
important for
those
having
investments will pay off.
supervisory talent, for example, when you reach
Yes,
Senator. So as
And
you
I
know,
take
this
it,
was a big
Mr.
revelation
Taylor,
to the
do you
U.S.
agree with
actually
this?
from the
Not only
1940s,
do
and it came out of
agree, it's an
the war effort.
issue that,
It
you're
accelerated by
increasingly seeing on the
Sputnik and
private
then the
sector
creation
side.
of the space
Corporations are
program.
underwriting,
And what
and
we've
we
come
don't
to understand,
have
and now there's a lot of data on this,
lag
which
in terms of
summarized in my
compensation.
testimony.
So
we
many,
have a whole
increasingly,
book on this topic,
organizations are
is that
building
when you
their
put
own
money into
childcare
basic science, you
facilities
generate
and
a
fully
whole range of ideas, many of which you
subsidizing
don't
them to draw
expect
talent
to,
in and to
see.
retain that
And then
talent.
if you have a process of channeling that into specific applications, the space program would be one public purpose program, but there's many other commercializations, including everything that's brought you digital computers and the internet, for example, and mobile telecommunications. That
The other thing,
machinery
though,
that we
Senator
have in the
Warren,
United States is
Warren, that I
actually
think
pretty
is really
strong. The private
important
sector
is
thinks.
increasingly
The private
we
sector
speak
does
about,
not
and
invest
we're seeing
enough
this
in
in all of
basic
our
science
data,
because it's all about the
it's
spillover effects.
dependent care.
It's all about
So more than
all those
just
unexpected effects. It's all
childcare.
about being able to
Many of us find
suddenly invent a
ourselves in the
vaccine
middle of
because you've got a
this
new disease
sandwich
you've never heard of
generation
before,
where you
but you have that
have to
capability.
decide
And
not
so
to go
and so
take a job
the federal
because no one
commitment
is there to
to
provide for your
science is
elderly
fundamental to our
parents
economic
or
prosperity,
grandparents.
but
So we
also,
are
Mr.
seeing
Chairman,
a
to our
big
national security,
theme
because
in all
this
of
is
our
what we've been
data
very
that
good at.
says
This is
not
what's
only
propelled us forward in
childcare,
many ways, and
but
this is what
broadly
China has learned from us
dependent care.
and what they're
So I
doubling
think
down
this
on
is
now.
terrific.
So
You know,
we have
I'm
to
all for
invest more
building
just
a
to stay up with
strong
them. I
defense
think we can do even better.
manufacturing
Is it
workforce,
true?
the topic
I was
we're
always
here
of the
today to
understanding
discuss.
that the private
But
sector is not
let's
going to
treat it
invest
like
in
the
something
supply
that has a
chain issue
return on
that it
investment
is
that goes
and
beyond
address
5 years.
root
I don't know if
causes
that
like
number is
underinvestment in
the
child
number
care and
you
dependent care
go by, and that's why it's up to the
child
federal
care work-
government to be making these basic science investments, because private sector just can't do it if they're not going to see a return on the money.
It can be about time horizon. I think much more is about spillover effects. So the Human Genome Project, for example, was
glad to
shopped
be
around some
working
private
with
venture
members of
capitalists
this
in the
committee to
1980s.
invest
They
in
turned it down
DoD's
because they said,
child
look, great
care
project, you're going to create a lot of knowledge,
program.
but we
I
won't be able to
wanna call
capture
out
the
my,
value of that
partner in
ourselves.
this,
It'll be
Senator
general
Scott.
knowledge.
We're
So the Human
working on
Genome
this
Project
in
was
our
funded, as you know, by the federal
subcommittee.
government. Massive
And
success,
we're gonna keep
300,000
fighting for
jobs
affordable child
created,
care
tremendously
for our
strong
defense
industry,
workforce
powers a
and
big
for
part
all
of our
Americans.
economy,
Thank
and
you, Mr.
produces
Chairman.
drugs,
Senator Warren.
therapies, and
Senator Scott.
vaccines that are essential to
I
wanna
every
thank
part
some-
of
Warren,
everybody
we've
in
had a
this
good
country.
subcommittee on
But he
personnel.
needed that
We're
public
having one this
impetus,
afternoon
and this, of course,
that's
is
gonna
what the
talk
National
about,
Institutes of Health does really well. But we need more of that, and we
injuries
need more of that
from,
across more sectors.
Well, somebody who was always trying to sell our space
So it's
program,
gonna
what
be-
I would,
it'll be
stress
because
is,
we gotta deal
it's
with
not,
this.
wasn't about like a product like
here's what I don't
Velcro.
understand. You know
It
how
was
many
about
full-time
creating
jobs have been added in the
industries,
country in the last
industries that no
last 3
longer
months?
existed. I mean, our
Anybody
aerospace
know?
industry here in the United States has become a big part of our economy. And that didn't exist before, the 1960s, really. So from a national
We've lost
security
1.5 million.
perspective,
We're adding
what
part-time
opportunities, I want to connect this to the CHIPS
So you're
and
trying to figure out
Science
why
Act.
is
So
this
what
happening?
opportunities
When I was,
are we
I became
missing
governor at
by
the,
not
at the
fully
end of
funding
a big
the
downturn.
CHIPS
I
and
became governor
Science
January 2011.
Act
And I went to a
Because this
National
could be
Guard,
really
they're
a
coming
long
back from
overdue and
overseas,
historic
and they
investment in
had
American
30%
research and
unemployment.
innovation.
Oh, it's a breakthrough piece of legislation, absolutely,
And
Senator.
then,
That
I
taps
ran
into
my
what
whole
was done
campaign
previously in
on
the
getting
40s and with the
people
space
jobs.
program, but goes
I
much
said I'd
further.
get
And
700,000
it is a little
jobs.
bit painful that the
And so I tried to
appropriation has
figure out how
not
to get
followed
that
through.
done.
So
So we
Congress
just tried to
recognized the
figure out-
opportunity, and I think
I had to
agreed
go recruit
on a very broad
companies every
bipartisan
day,
basis,
try to
but you've
get
got to
them to
put
come
some money
forward,
into it.
because people were
Then,
moving
Senator,
out
I
of
think the
Florida
question becomes,
back in
what next?
2010 when I
Where
got
are the
elected.
next sectors where we want
So
the
we did a
breakthroughs?
variety
What's
of
the next
things.
equivalent of
First off,
satellites,
we-
next equivalent of the internet,
You know,
next
we, as
equivalent
the
of
federal
mobile
government, we give a lot of money to
There's
our
a lot of
states
opportunities in
to,
biomanufacturing. There's a lot of opportunities in other parts of semiconductors. There's opportunities in critical minerals, for example. There's a long list, and I think Congress needs to engage with that. And I think you should be thinking about CHIPS and Science Act 2.0 after, of course, you fund the
for
the
workforce
first version.
boards.
Yeah, I had other,
And
you know,
how
some
many
questions that
people
led to,
they
you know,
were
STEM
filling jobs
education,
for?
but I look at basic science
Nobody had any
and
idea.
STEM education
no measurement.
as being sort
So the
of
first
like
thing is
kind of in
we
the same
required
bucket.
them to give us a daily
You know, this is
report.
like the
It was over-
seed
I
corn
think it was
for,
250 over
you know, it's the
$250 million a year
catalyst
that we're
for what
spending
grows the
all federal money.
economy, both education
That's
and
number one.
investment
Number
in
two
science.
is
So thank you.
The National
I'm a
Defense
veteran,
Education Act, over in
and I
1958,
think
and
it's
NASA.
ridiculous
The
that
two
people
big
come back
reactions to
from
Sputnik. They were both
overseas and
brilliant
don't
moves
have a
by
job.
Congress, Senator.
I remember
So
I
I'm sure we
was
can do
getting
it.
out at the.
Well, thank
right
you,
after-
Mr. Chairman. I have a
was-
couple questions
I
for the
didn't go to
record.
Vietnam, but I served
we'll
during
accept
the
those,
Vietnam
Senator.
era.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
when Vietnam ended,
Senator Schmidt,
it was
please.
impossible.
Thank
to
you,
get
Mr.
jobs in
Chairman.
this country.
Dr. Johnson, I
And so
wanted to.
all my friends getting out couldn't
Can I
find a
explore,
job. So we
your
started
idea of
ranking. We
these
started
tech hubs?
getting monthly reports
I'm from
on
St.
that.
Louis area, and St. Louis has been identified, and there's a lot of assets there. So you've got NGA, you've got the Taylor Institute there. There's a lot of alignment.
And it took about a year. We
that
did a
can be a
variety of
draw.
programs. We did a lot of workforce meetings and things
One
like
of the
that. It took about a
challenges
year,
I
but
think
actually
as
our
we talk
unemployment
about
was lower
workforce
for our veterans than it
is
was
there
for
is a
non-veterans.
bit
It
of
was way
there
higher
is a
for veterans when I started. I
misalignment
think it was
in
almost
in
15%
higher
or
education,
something like
right?
that
You've
when I
got
started.
a lot of 4 years that
Unemployment
chase
for the state was
degrees
over
for
10.
enrollment. You've got community
Then what we
colleges
started
trying to
doing
figure
is
out where they fit in. You've got
when
these
I became
apprenticeship
governor, all they
programs
wanted
that,
to
as
do
you
is
mentioned in
say,
your
"Oh, if
opening
you don't go to
comments, maybe
college,
sometimes
you know, man,
are limited to
you
what
know,
that
you
particular
must-
company
you
might
must not
need.
be
So
very smart, you're not
with
gonna have
that
the
as sort of the
opportunity, which is
backdrop,
complete BS.
how does this
Most of my
actually
family
work?
didn't
Because
go to
I'm
college,
intrigued by
on the
this, and I think it's
exception
an
of my brothers and
encouraging
sisters, my
idea.
nieces and nephews,
We
and they're
do
never
need to
unemployed.
have, I think,
They
a
always have a
industrial
job.
base that's more widely dispersed.
The other thing we did is
We've
we
talked
waived
about,
a whole
the
bunch of
dangers in
things
our
for our
supply
veterans.
chain. And so let's just take
So
let's just
let
take
me-
St. Louis as
my
an
first
example. It
questions.
could be anywhere. It could be in Rhode Island or
So
somewhere
we
else.
have all these
How does this
rules
actually work?
for-
How do we get in 5 to 10 years a place where somebody who wants to work on nuclear submarines, so not necessarily just the engineer that's got the 4-year degree, how does this work? How does alignment work in a tech hub?
So St. Louis is a
for
fascinating
schools.
example,
And
Senator,
we
in part
have
because you were
state
one of the
schools,
country's
we
leading
have-
tech hubs
we
100,
have
120 years ago,
not-for-profits,
right?
we
And
have,
one very unfortunate thing that
for-profits, we have
happened,
all
and
this
I
stuff.
don't have any particular
Should
personal
there
blame
be
on this, is
different
that
standards
as
for everybody?
innovation
I mean,
moved
when
east and
you
west
guys
coast,
hire somebody,
you've
you
got
say,
less
man,
innovation,
I think
less
they
corporate
ought to,
headquarters in
there
St.
ought to
Louis,
be a
but not
different
for any
standard
particular good
for
reason.
how they get
right? I
federal
mean,
money or
people have
Pell
got strange
Grants or
reasons
any of
like
this
the way
stuff. Should
where
they
airline
should be
routes
treated
went and so on,
differently
but
just
it's
because
not-
of
you've got a lot of
their,
talent. The
how
talent
they're
can't move,
organized?
doesn't want to move, shouldn't
Anybody have
need to
a
move.
view on
I
that?
think tying it to my answer to
'Cause,
Senator
I mean,
Kelly,
give you
if
an
we
example.
have, if Congress
you're a
has, and if
university,
the relevant
you have no
agencies
obligation
have priority sectors
to help people get a
pursue,
job.
and places
I changed the
that are
formula in
available,
Florida,
including
and we
with
became
state
number
and
one
local
higher
support,
education
which
because
would
they
be
said,
making sure the
I
workforce
remember, I'm a
develops.
kid
Senator
that
Scott
had
made
no
great
money,
points
went
about
to
that.
school,
Also
went to
available
junior
housing,
college
I
because it
would
was only
say.
$200 a semester.
Senator
The
Schmidt,
university was
it's not,
expensive,
you're not
$255.
adding 10,000 workers, but they've have nowhere to live, so the price of housing goes up, and that means you've got to pay them a high wage or they just won't come. So I think that looking for that combination, and I think St. Louis scores very highly in our metrics because it seems to us that you have exactly that kind of combination.
And
of
they said, we're going
circumstances.
to give our
We found
universities money
102
based on
places
three
in 36
things.
states that
You
have
get a job,
potential.
how much
And
money you
honestly,
make,
a
what's it
country
cost
this
to get a
size,
degree.
with
So actually
science
people
being
got degrees
so
and we
important
kept
to our
tuition
economy
low.
and to our national
So
defense,
by the time I
should
left,
be
we were
running a
number one
massive
higher
portfolio
education.
of
Now
these deep
University of
science
Florida,
investments,
according
looking
to a
for
lot
ways
of
to
studies like
commercialize
Wall
it,
Street
getting those
Journal,
public-private
is the number
partnerships
one public
with
university
state
in the
local
country
support,
because
but
we
the federal
paid
government
for
is the
our result.
catalyst. Without the federal government,
So what do you
we
guys
not
think
get
about
out to be able to move the
having
needle. And
having
we've
the
done it
same
before,
standards
and you
for
agreed to do it
we have
again in the
standards
chips
for
and science.
preparatory
So
schools
that's
that they have
from
to help people
from
get a
your
job. They
answer
don't
there.
get
That
money.
seems like that's a
Same standards
research
for,
investment
all
side.
schools.
But on the workforce piece,
Senator, I work
I'm
for an
genuinely
engineering
curious.
school that
Let's
spends a
say
lot of time
I'm
trying to get its graduates
17-year-old
jobs.
in high
and I fully
school
agree that's a very important emphasis. I
you know,
also point to
don't-
Orlando. It's
I wanna-
emphasized
I want
as
to
one of the
pursue this
leading
path
examples
where,
of
you know,
public-private partnerships.
There's some immediate
generating
opportunities.
skills
What does
related
that
to
look
defense
like, or what
industrial
should it look like
for that individual to try to navigate to get to a place where we want to be within that tech hub?
So Senator Scott talked about workforce planning at the state level. I think it's better done at state and local than at the federal level, where he was matching up incoming investment or defense contractors.
Do I think that one size, we should have one size fits all for even higher education, even the university sector? I think some diversity and competition is good. I think MIT does very well to do that competition. I think encouraging others to do exactly what you're saying is a good idea. Would I require it? I think in this country, such requirements are hard to make work and often get a backlash. But I think where you're pushing, Senator, that education of all kinds should be linked to finding jobs and keeping people in jobs and measuring outcomes and making that data available to everyone, I think that's tremendously important. And I think this is a completely bipartisan
So the thing I
consensus
did
across
was,
the
if you
country.
came down,
When I talk to people,
if you were
it's not
Harris
politicized at all. Everybody
and you
wants
were gonna
something in this
expand,
direction.
or let's
The
say
federal
Northrop
government, though,
Grumman.
is the critical
They said they're
catalyst.
gonna
And then
add-
deciding which sectors and lining it up with the defense industrial base, that's a brilliant piece to add. Because if we know that submarines are important, or we know that aircraft are a certain kind of important, then and you know there's going to be a 20-year commitment to that from a national security point of view,
They're
then you
moving
can
stealth
plan a lot
bombers,
more
so I tried to
activities
get them to do more
around
of it in
that,
Florida.
including
So
the
they
location
said, we're going to need
of
X
those
number of jobs.
innovations.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys have
So we
anything to add to,
guaranteed,
yeah.
I guaranteed, because I paid for it, out of the
reality
state
is,
budget,
if I'm
I
gonna
said,
use
we're
the
going to
example of
graduate
that
these people
17-year-old, first
with
of
these
all, he or she
degrees.
needs to know
And some of
what
them
the
were universities,
opportunities
some were
are.
technical schools
So
and
I'm
stuff
sitting
like
on
that.
the
So
horizontal
do you think
wherever
that
I
that's
am.
what we ought
I
to be
just
doing
don't
with our
even know
education
what the
dollars?
possibilities are by virtue
I
of
think
my
workforce
background.
planning,
And then
Senator,
we've
of
got to
exactly the kind you're talking
specifically
about
articulate a
is very good. I
path
think we
that
need to be
may
careful
not,
about
and
over-subsidizing
oftentimes doesn't
the
require
private sector
a
of things they would
college degree.
otherwise have
It could
done.
be
But if
that,
it's a net
man, if
increase
you
to
do
defense
this for
industrial
6
base and on a
months,
federal
this could
state
prepare you for
partnership basis,
apprenticeship,
I
that could get
absolutely
you
agree
this
that
job,
making
et cetera.
sure
So we
people
literally-
have the
biggest problem
skills
that
and
we hear
are
from young
incentivized
people
to stay in
is
Florida,
they
which is also
understand
what
what
obviously
the
happened.
government
I
says
think
it
that's
needs or what our
really
country
important
says
for
it
the
needs.
development
They
of
just
defense
don't
industrial
know the
base.
pathway to
Thanks.
get there.
Thank you,
So
Senator Scott.
educating
Senator Ronald,
old
please.
school guidance counselors, like, right, everyone's not going to college, you may be going to the workforce. This is how you prepare yourselves for that. Those are the two most important things as we're hearing from younger potential workers, and we talk to high school students a lot. And
Thank
they're
you,
like,
Mr.
"Listen,
Chairman.
I know what I think
We
I
know
want to
that
do. That sounds
there
interesting.
is a
And if you can
workforce
pay me
shortage
35
in
bucks
just
an
about
hour
every
at 20
business,
years old,
every
why not?
industry,
Without debt,
from
right,
restaurants
college,
to
et
the
cetera.
defense
I just don't know
industry.
how
This is
that
for Mr.
works.
Taylor.
So
The DoD
articulating
has
to the
established
future
the
workforce
Defense
how it all works
Civilian
will
Training
go a
Corps
long
to
way
attract
towards
top
solving these
talent into the defense ecosystem and
Bring back shop
specifically
class.
relating to acquisitions.
Let them
So
work with their
how
hands.
is this training
Let them
corps
build
doing
things.
in
Let them
terms of
tinker.
attracting
Let them
the kind of
print things
people
with a
that the
3D
defense
printer.
industry needs?
Let them
Thank
be
you for the
creative.
question. I think
They can
Dr.
see
Lockwood would be more
then that
familiar
there's a
with that
path for
particular
me
DTC
to do
program.
these mid-skill jobs.
Thank you.
That there's
I'll
dignity in
note
that.
there are
that the country
actually
needs
currently
that.
several,
It's valued.
STEM
and in that shop
employment,
class, you can make the pitch. Workforce
Bring
coordination
back
programs
civics and
going on in the
shop
department.
class. Let's do it. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shop class is good. I don't know about in the era of
Defense,
AI.
and
artificial
certainly that one's
intelligence,
among them.
How many
I believe that these programs would be far more effective if there was a greater degree of coordination among them. For example, sharing of hiring objectives and even of candidates. Likewise, to the other senator's point earlier, providing metrics for such programs would be very important.
Well, why isn't there coordination? Why aren't there metrics to measure the effectiveness of these programs?
They have mountains and troughs.
Whose responsibility is it
the
to
Pentagon
ensure those
often changes
aspects are
procurement
addressed?
requirements.
Thank you for the question. As to
two
the
submarines a year. No, Virginia class.
particular statutory authority, I'll take that for the record. I will note that.
You know, if you're a manufacturer, pretty hard to engage in recruiting, hiring, training. Involves investment.
A mandate to coordinate among programs, to share best practices,
and
to ensure that these programs are appropriately targeted to market and are adequately innovating. Would be very effective, and I believe that's something that the Congress and the Senate in particular can draw greater attention to.
Chairman Reed has done extraordinarily
you can help us to, my staff to better focus on some of those kinds of changes if we need to change. Mr. Taylor, I was particularly gratified that you mentioned that if we want people to have STEM experiences in education, that it's really something that we should look at from pre-K to 12, and that we also should pay attention to
the ability to recruit, train, and hire a workforce like Electric Boat?
The workers will go somewhere else. They're not going to sit around and wait for us to get our act together. They have families to
Senator
feed.
Rosen has a bill
So
that would
unless we can
encourage, I
really
think, more,
maintain the continuity of that
emphasis
production
on these kinds of
pipeline, which
programs.
I agree we
have a
desperately
bill
need,
that would
we
focus
will
on
struggle
women
to
and
retain.
minorities in STEM
And the prospect
education.
of
What
that, even the
ideas do you
prospect
have
of
that
potentially
would
not knowing. So the idea of not knowing.
focus us on the need
employers,
for
employees are voting with their feet.
paying
So even
attention
if you
to
have the
K-12
employee, they're
and
currently
onward.
working in these
If we want
industries,
more people
this
to
level of
to,
indecision
being
gives them a
STEM educated.
anxiety that
Those
will
often
often
thank you for that
lead them
question.
to
I had a
come
good
to the
portion
private
of
sector
once
because they're
running
like,
what's
at
called the
least
Thurgood
there,
Marshall
I kind
College
of know
Fund,
what
which
I
represents
know.
the country's publicly
Senator,
supported
I
historically
completely
black
agree
colleges
with
and
where you're going and what
universities,
my colleagues
47
just
of
said, but
them.
I would
In
also
fact,
remind
Mr.
everyone that the
Gates here
V-12
was my
Merlin engine that
colleague.
powered
We
the Spitfire and the Hurricane in World War II
created
and
a
was
program
decisive
where
for
we
keeping Germany out of Britain, started to develop in 1929 before there was any public procurement guidelines for that engine. There was a private sector innovation, Senator, and what you really need in this country is not just better organized procurement, exactly as you're wanting. You need people who are pushing on the innovative frontier for the new stuff that Pentagon's doesn't even know they want yet.
People.
Right? And so how do we incentivize that? How do we encourage that? How do we build the skills? And I think the shop class has never been more important, Senator, because I think losing those manual skills, losing our thinking with our hands is a huge disadvantage when we think about the world. Because the engineers who built the Merlin, who built the Spitfire,
to STEM
who
careers,
built
but
the
more
American effort in
importantly,
World
the
War II,
importance of
were very
taking
hands-on
certain
people,
types
weren't
of
they?
curriculum
They
early
understood how to
on,
bend metal,
so that by
and
the
that's
time-
the
if you wanted
key
to go to
to a
college
lot
to
of
be an
these
engineer, there are
innovations
things you
we're
needed to
talking
do in
about.
high
You
school,
know,
courses you
I
had to
think
take, et
what you're
cetera.
saying about
So we mapped
shop
them.
class,
We gave
which is
them, oftentimes their
not
families
just
did
what
not
happens
have,
in the
they didn't have
classroom,
parents who were
but
college
the
graduates, or
manual
if they were college
skills
graduates, they weren't STEM
and
college
the
graduates. We
instinctive
literally
approach to how to put things together and make them work. That's what Electric Boat is trying to hire. The welders, the electricians, the pipe fitters, people who
took those kids and we followed
are skilled
them
at
through
the trades.
10th grade,
And
preparing
not only
them
in
up
shop
to and
class,
including
but
taking
frankly
the SAT,
in high school.
ACT, et cetera.
I
So
think we need to
those
do a better
sorts of
job of
programs helped us
selling
yield a significantly higher number
people,
of future STEM workers
on the
from
idea.
those communities
You know,
than
you can
we would
have
without
not just a job, but
So
a
you're
career.
saying that we have
a
to
real
be very
career,
intentional
making a lot more money
about how we're going about it,
than,
and that you have some longitudinal
let's say,
data
my
that
4
shows
children,
that when
they
you
were
are
all
this
educated
focused,
liberal arts
that you will
institutions.
have
3 of
people
them are
going
lawyers.
into the STEM areas. Because, for example,
like
women
me.
and minority
But,
people drop out
there
of
are
the STEM
a lot more lawyers
pipeline
per
at every
person
step
maybe
of
than
the
there
way,
need to be,
because especially
and we
for
need
women,
more
for
of the
example, there are
folks
not very
who
many
can
models
do the work at
for women
Electric Boat
in
with
STEM.
the careers
And in terms of workforce
that
training,
really provide
we
not
are
just
building
financial gratification, but real dignity, the dignity of work. You're nodding, so I assume you agree.
Dr. Lockwood said it already, sorry. Dr. Lockwood said, I totally agree, dignity and status
a
and purpose.
dry dock
But you've got to
at
also
Pearl
pay
Harbor
people good
Shipyard.
money.
It is the
right? Because
biggest
people have to live, and that's a
infrastructure
question of how much you
project
pay
that
them
the
relative to what it
DoD
costs to
is
live in
engaged
the
in.
areas that you're trying to
It
develop.
is,
But if you get that right, which
3.5
we have done in
billion,
this country before,
I
Senator
hope that it will
Blumenthal,
come in
and
at
you've got
that
very strong,
price.
obviously,
But
places in
they
Rhode Island
had a
and
hard
in
time
Connecticut that
finding
also get this
workers
right. Then
for
we
this
can do
project. Some
incredible things.
2,000 plus
Senator, there's-
workers
Go
will
ahead.
be needed
Go ahead, Taylor.
to build
Yes, I
this
would
dry
just submit
dock
to you that
over the
we
next 2 years or
oftentimes
so.
talk about and believe that our
And
talent
in the
pool must
meantime, we
come
have an
from the
apprenticeship
K through 12
program
system.
for the Pearl Harbor
We
Naval
increasingly
Shipyard,
have
one of
that
4
middle
public
group, that
shipyards that
middle
we have.
45 to
They had
55-year-old who is
2,500
now
applicants
displaced,
for
wants to work.
152
You want to talk about
positions.
dignity
So
of work.
obviously, there are a
And
lot of
so
people
many
who
of our
want to
training
get
programs
this kind of training so they can
disproportionately
be in the
focus on young people,
pipeline to work
and that's good.
in our shipyards, but
we're
we're
ignoring
not
that there's
creating
a
enough
significant
spaces
swath of the
for them.
population that is available, wants that dignity of work, needs to do it, and we don't provide reskilling and upskilling programs from the government, frankly, to them. We'll give you Pell Grant all day for the kid, but what happens to
Do
that
any of you have
45-year-old
any
whose job
ideas
has
what we
been
can do
significantly
to to
on the account of
accommodate
technology,
these
and they could
young
become a
people
welder, but
who
themselves don't
want
know how
to
do that
be
and don't
trained
think there's a pathway to that. So
in
I
our
would not
workforce.
ignore that significant
Anyone?
portion of our population
Yes.
that wants to work but doesn't know how to reskill.
It's already been mentioned by a few of my colleagues here, but school to work training pipelines and close public-private partnerships with educational institutions are very effective at establishing firm pipelines for workers. We've demonstrated this many times in the private sector, particularly in the auto industry. In some of the states represented here, reinforcing the training at community colleges and trade schools and linking those skilled professions directly into where the jobs are needed.
arms. They need support. They need the resources. They are sadly lacking, and we need to give it to them in the supplemental that's now before the House that we passed here in the Senate. But they have been extraordinarily innovative and creative.
Senator, apprenticeships powered by AI. I think that's where the future is, and that's what the private sector is not going to do enough without your prompting.
Participation today, but for your
Thank you, Mr.
willingness
Chairman.
to travel to Ukraine and to
Thank
do
you
so
very
many
much,
other
Senator
things.
Ronald.
Senator Mullin, please. This has been a very,
Thank
very
you, Mr.
helpful
Chairman, and
and
thank you
useful
for the
panel.
witnesses that are
I would
here.
like
I
to
just
touch on
find
again
it
on
the
something
irony
that
of
was
us
mentioned,
talking
but
about
that is
what we need to do to get a
the
workforce
perception of
going,
working
and, you know,
for
from
either
a
Department of
guy
Defense
that's
or a defense
owned
company,
multiple
seems
trade
to be
companies.
very negative.
I
That
mean,
is
we
an issue
incentivize
have
in
to deal
Congress,
with,
we
and
incentivize
just
people to stay
quickly,
home.
Mr.
They
Taylor,
can work
Dr.
the system.
Dr.
I mean, here we're legalizing.
Yes, we actually.
We're legalizing
at the end of the
drugs,
day, it
marijuana
is
for
far
medical
more attractive
purposes,
to most
and we're
employers. They
incentivizing
know
kids
of
to
the
get a medical
brands,
card
name
to
them, I won't
smoke.
quote the country. You know, it's Lockheed Martin, Boeing, et cetera. That is a far more attractive opportunity to them than, and they don't even think about the opportunities, as I know half of the American civilian workforce has said they don't think
Marijuana
about
in
the
high
Department
school
of
at 18
Defense
years
proper.
old, and they can't
So
pass
to
a
the
drug test to get
extent
hired by
that we
DOD to
could
begin
create-
with.
This is what the
I mean,
job
we
is.
do
It
it
doesn't matter if it's the
ourselves
Department of
here in
Defense or the
Congress.
rest of
If
the
we want to
industry.
really get our
Industrial
workforce
base, I think
going,
we
then we
can
need to
solve some of
incentivize
the
people to
problems.
work,
Private
not have an
sector has a
excuse to
one-on-one
stay home.
government. Those roles.
And we have a program that gives
It's a
people a
very
helping
interesting
hand. We
problem
won't give them
that
a
you're
helping
articulating,
hand to
Senator,
push them
because
into the
I
workforce
do think
either.
serving
Like,
the
give a
armed
helping
forces
hand,
is
you
still
stay on a
prestigious
platform,
and sought after.
then you
I served in
disincentivize
the
them to be able to
military
step
when I was
up.
young, not
I've
in
had
this country, unfortunately. I did register for
hundreds of
selective service
employees
when I was
that
eligible. I got turned
refuse a
down because I was slightly
raise
too old, which
over
was
the years
disappointing.
that I have been
But
self-employed
I
because
think
they
the reason
can't
for that,
afford to take the raise
and those
because
were
they take
regarded
this
as
raise
good
to
things, and those were great
$18 an
experiences.
hour.
And I
They
think that's
lose
because
these,
we have this perception and
benefits.
correct understanding that
And if you
you
can't take a
build
raise to
skills
$18 an
in
hour and
those
do that
military
job,
roles.
you're never going
And
to be able to
somehow,
get the job that can do $30 an hour.
perhaps it's about the
Because
wage
ladder
classification system that's always articulated. I'm not saying that there aren't deep structural problems, but somehow that same prestige, that same conviction that you're building leadership. We have great students in our MBA classes who are former military, for
Stops
example.
at that point.
And
It's our fault.
And who are terrific
And so
leaders,
if
and
we
everybody
in Congress want to
automatically
get serious
assumes
about
that's
the workforce,
what you get if you're
then we need to
bringing
figure
a
out how we
lieutenant or a
incentivize
captain into
people
an MBA
to
program.
get into the workforce.
And somehow that's
That means we
not
need to
coming
push
across
them
in the
into the
defense
workforce,
industrial
not
base. And I think
become,
that,
not
I think
allow
Dr.
them to
Lockwood's
become
got some very
dependents
good
of the
ideas.
state.
And
that's
as you
exactly
said,
what we
how to
have. We have
fix that.
three
But I think the way you
generations now
articulate
of
just
people that are
in
dependent
those
on the
terms is
state.
exactly right.
That's me ranting. I'll
Thank you.
stop.
Dr. Lockwood, please.
And I will move
Yes,
on to answer my questions.
I think it is to some
Dr.
extent about
Lockwood,
prestige.
I
It's
would
also
like
about
to
what
start
people
with
know
you.
about.
As the
I'll
largest
note
maintenance,
that
repair, and overhaul
there's been a
facility
great
in the world, which is
consolidation
at
in the
Tinker Air Force
military
Base,
footprint.
we have
When you
a
ask young
huge
people, do you
number
know a
of civilian
veteran? Fewer than
employees,
ever say
around
yes.
16,000. Most
so
of these employees are wage grade
we just need to be out there in the community. We need to say that
and many
this
have
is not
decades of
someone else's
experience. We have
duty.
received
This is not
reports
something I can outsource. This is our responsibility as all Americans to participate in some way in making sure that our country and that of our
reports that
allies
the DLA, which is
safe.
the Defense Logistic Agency,
So I think if we couch
is
it as a
increasingly
community
relying on
responsibility, and if we
contractors
put
to do these
ourselves out
kinds of
there in new
jobs at other
ways, that both our
sites.
partners
Are
in
you
the
familiar
industrial
with this?
base and our defense civilian workforce
with a
can get
follow-up
more of the
question on
attention that
and,
it rightly
when using
deserves.
contractors instead of government employees, what are the vetting requirements for
as I
bringing
said initially, this
them
is
in
not,
on our bases?
A one-stop.
It's
we
my
look forward to
understanding
your
that, like
collaboration
other
and-
workers
and your
on
input, too.
military
If there are
facilities,
issues that
that
we're not
they must
dealing with,
pass
or
a
we should be
background
dealing with, or
investigation.
there's advice you can give us, don't
Are
hesitate, please.
are we
Thank you very
concerned
much with that. I will adjourn
about
the hearing.
moving that direction with contractors instead of having our own contractors or our own employees working for the Department of Defense in the civilian capacity, relying more on that? that?
I will note that the use of contractors in general is very costly to the department. In many cases, the department is paying a heavy premium for the use of contractors. So rather than necessarily take the expedient route of simply contracting out for that additional labor support, I would encourage instead the department to correctly align incentives for the management of its own civilian personnel.
Is it, I mean, because we are paying a much higher price to have outside contractors. And so if we can pay that wage for outside contractors, what is it that's keeping our government, us, from